Chapter 1426. Did he really want to live for another 500 years? This was the great martial Empyrean's heart. It was ominous, but he couldn't say it out loud. He had to grit his teeth and fight to the death. This moment was the most intense moment of the battle between the two. The 7 death's bodies and the 7 great martial battle physiques attacked together. It was truly earth-shattering. The sky was blood-red, lightning interweaved, and the cries of immortals and demons could be heard. The 7 bodies traversing the sky had always been a synonym for invincibility, but now the great martial Empyrean's heart was dripping blood. The first 2 battle physiques were fine, but now the 3rd Dharma physique had been crushed by the millstone formed by Chu Feng. What kind of power was this? The grand great martial Empyrean had been turned into powder upon contact. A mist of blood and energy exploded. This scene was too terrifying. An old Empyrean who had lived for a long time, a famous powerhouse, had been blown up like a wild dog. This was too shocking. Everyone was shaken and in an uproar. It was like the heavens were falling and the earth was splitting apart. The battle between Empyreans would often result in both sides suffering and losing their lives. But now, the scene in front of them had overturned their memories. A famous Empyrean had used a heaven-defying technique, the 7 death's body, but the result was that he had been crushed. How is this possible? Master has suffered a great loss. His origin energy has been greatly consumed. The great martial Empyrean's 6th disciple, Yun Heng, exclaimed in a low voice. His face was full of shock and unease. It was he who had received Chu Feng and led him into the floating golden palace. Who would have thought that this harmless youth would suddenly release a monstrous demonic aura? The 7 death's body is unparalleled since ancient times. It was created by the founder of my Tao and should be invincible in the heavens and earth. How could this be? The great martial lineage's eldest disciple's voice was trembling. The other disciples were also shaken. Their expressions had changed, and their hearts were filled with an ominous feeling. The founder of this lineage, the martial madman, was privately called the martial emperor by some disciples. It was said that he was unrivaled throughout history and that his heavenly merit was unparalleled. In fact, this was also the case. Ever since the fall of Li Su, the martial madman was considered unstoppable by the world. There were even rumors that the true body of the martial madman had entered a few famous mountains in the Yang realm and obtained an unknown inheritance. Even if Li Su were to be resurrected, he would not be able to suppress him. As for not long ago, the martial madman was suspected to have suffered a small loss at the first mountain after his rebirth. Later, it was proven that it was not his real body, but a wisp of clear qi. Empyrean Supreme Marshal shouted. This time, several battle bodies rushed out, surrounding and attacking. But in the end, they still encountered misfortune. One of them was swallowed up by the millstone, and then the other 2 millstones began to spin. It was a tragic sight to behold. In the blink of an eye, 4 of the extreme martial 7 death bodies had been lost, and the reversal of the situation had exceeded everyone's expectations. This wasn't mutual destruction, but rather his own consumption. It was just too shocking. Even the heavenly deities watching from the side felt a chill run down their backs, their minds greatly shaken. Bang! The sky shook violently, and the other 3 battle bodies of Empyrean Supreme Marshal finally gave Chu Feng a blow. The combined power of the 3 bodies was unimaginable. Everyone saw that around the millstone that Chu Feng had transformed into, the space was shaken and cracked. Black cracks extended out for who knew how many miles. Astral winds were like the sea and lightning, whistling and ruining some of the magic tools on the battlefield. For example, the broken spears left behind by the 4 battle bodies of Extreme Martial had dimmed and rotted away. As for the center of the storm, the millstone that Chu Feng had transformed into was also rumbling and shaking violently. Then, the qi dispersed and returned to his flesh and blood, revealing his true body. He gasped for breath, his chest heaving up and down. Although he had consumed some energy, it wasn't a big deal. On the other side, Extreme Marshal was increasingly uneasy. He even had an impulse to flee the battlefield. As an Empyrean, he had a strong intuition. He seemed to vaguely see the final scene of a bloody body and heads flying off. He didn't want to die here. Knowing that he was no match for Chu Feng, he absolutely wouldn't fight to the death. He didn't want to die in vain. Seeking fortune and avoiding harm was the instinct of a being at his level. However, after several attempts, he felt that the world was dark and gloomy. The backups he had arranged in his Dao field were all useless. All the passages connected to the outside world had been sealed, forcing me to cut off all means of retreat and fight to the death. Extreme Marshal thought. Then, his eyes gradually became dazzling, like two immortal swords that were drawn out, becoming increasingly bright and sharp. In that instant, he had an intense belief. He reflected on himself and realized just how dangerous a situation he had just been in. After so many years of comfort, thanks to the reputation of the martial madman, he had actually lost his initiative and was actually afraid of battle. After so many years of recuperation and not being tempered between life and death, I have actually lost myself. How can I believe in the so-called strong intuition and perception? Only by fighting can an Empyrean advance. I have been living in comfort for far too long. Extreme Marshal seemed to have awakened from the fog and strengthened his belief. After estimating his opponent's strength, he became anxious without fighting. This was absolutely the path to death. At this moment, he woke up and was incomparably excited. Because in that instant, he knew that he had most likely grasped the path to becoming an almighty. If he could survive today's calamity, he might be able to succeed. There were all kinds of tribulations in the process of becoming an almighty, and the last few steps were losing oneself. Today, he almost lost his heart, which should be the embodiment of this. During this process, Extreme Marshal's remaining 3 battle bodies fused into one. He didn't take advantage of the situation to chase after Chu Feng. He knew that the 7 Deaths body couldn't kill his opponent and would only consume his remaining essence energy. This was a secret technique that was known to be invincible, but he still hadn't comprehended it thoroughly enough. You want to kill me? That's not necessarily true. I've broken through the barrier and realized that this is the final test to become an almighty. I've finally pushed aside the ominous clouds, but you will die, Extreme Marshal coldly said. After recovering his true form, he was also violently gasping for breath as he swallowed the rich energy between heaven and earth. Although it was a short confrontation, it had consumed too much energy. The rise and fall of an Empyrean Dao fruit were frequently involved. The process was extremely terrifying. If it had been anyone else in that battle just now, they would have died who knows how many times. The secret techniques between the two were extraordinary techniques that could kill ordinary Empyreans. At that instant, everyone on the dojo was utterly dumbfounded. Everyone looked up at the sky. That young man was handsome beyond compare and his eyes were bright, but he was actually so terrifying. He made the famous Empyrean Extreme Marshal bleed from his nose and mouth. It was truly an anomaly. Why do I sense that his Tao immortal is not an Empyrean, but only in the Divine King domain? Someone was puzzled. The legendary King Heng, someone said with a trembling voice. The one who spoke was an Empyrean, but in the end, he turned pale and his voice trembled. Many people had never even heard of King Heng. When a certain Empyrean spoke about it, everyone was shocked. King Heng was an existence that could not be found in generations? It was difficult to find such a being in the entire world. How can this be? Impossible. The gray-haired Empyrean who had attacked Chu Feng earlier wiped away the blood at the corner of his mouth. He trembled, and his entire body went cold. He felt a lingering fear. Not long ago, He had willingly acted as Extreme Marshall's lackey and helped him. He had lost a scarlet gourd, but he had actually provoked the legendary King Heng. This was a being that had only appeared in prehistoric myths and legends. Its origins were too great. Once King Heng grew up, he would be able to suppress the world. In the field, Extreme Marshall moved. He was decisive and decisive. This was his home ground. After clearing away the fog in his heart, he seemed to have returned to his youth. His confidence and vigor surged to the heavens. Let the eras rise and fall, great waves wash away the sand, and the changes of the past and present, only what remains is true. Extreme Marshall spoke, his voice unhurried as he spat out 3 words, severing 1,000 autumns. In between his mouth and nose, a dazzling golden paper spewed out. Densely packed characters were inscribed on it, bearing the weight of time and supporting the world. For a moment, time curled about, wrapping him within. This was a great Tao paper condensed from his lifetime of comprehension. It became increasingly resplendent and dazzling as it hacked apart heaven and earth. Nothing could restrain it as it flew towards Chu Feng to kill him. In the eyes of outsiders, this was beyond mysterious. It was because everyone felt that time had come to a standstill and all living things were motionless. Right now, only the golden paper that Extreme Marshall produced was flying. It was like a heaven-shocking divine thunder, like an immortal sword from outer space. It covered the sky and couldn't be stopped. It was too terrifying and too grand, destroying everything. There was nothing that could defend against it. Was this the most powerful attack under the great Tao that represented the competition of all living things? Everyone felt their soul light tremble. Their bodies couldn't budge, and the world was silent here. Only that beam of light surged over and arrived in front of Chu Feng. It reached the space between his brows and was going to hack him into 2. At this moment of life and death, a pair of hands appeared soundlessly in front of the space between Chu Feng's brows. It was as if an eternal barrier had been broken. The pair of hands were sparkling and translucent like jade. They were densely packed with tiny characters as they clamped down on this piece of paper. In a split second, even Extreme Marshall's pupils contracted. His fatal attack was blocked just like that? It was firmly clamped by a pair of hands. Then, with a crack, the paper collapsed. How could he not be shocked? It looked like a piece of paper, but it was condensed with Extreme Marshall's essence, energy, and spirit. It was the sect's greatest technique that he had inscribed with his comprehension. In the end, it was still useless. At this time, everyone discovered that they could finally move and looked at that scene in shock. Only at this moment did they understand what kind of attack it was. Severing 1,000 autumns was a supreme technique that the martial madman found after his bitter experience after his battle with Li Su. He went deep into various famous mountains, great rivers, and other places of absolute death in the Yang realm and finally found it. It was known as one of the top 3 inheritances of the most powerful technique in history. It was related to time and accumulated the years. After grasping it, the heavens couldn't restrain it and would tremble. This was a technique prepared for the world's #1 powerhouse. It was also because of this that it was very difficult to cultivate. Extreme Marshall was extraordinarily talented, but he could only cultivate the incomplete version of this technique, severing 1,000 autumns. Even so, it was enough to defeat all kinds of creatures at this level. However, after the fact, it was a great blow to him, but it was still blocked by Chu Feng. Chu Feng didn't speak, but his heart was also greatly shaken. It wasn't the first time he had seen this technique. He had experienced it when he was fighting against Li Chentian, but he still felt the threat of this technique just now. Sigh. Extreme Marshall sighed. He seemed to be very depressed and had lost his spirit. There was even a state of lethargy and despair. This sigh made many of the onlookers depressed. This was a veteran powerhouse. He had used all his techniques, but he was actually suppressed just like that? The disciples and followers of the extreme martial lineage were even more shocked. How could that young-looking ghost from the lesser underworld be so strong? We are the descendants of the martial emperor's lineage. Why can't we stop him? Some people found it hard to accept. They clenched their fists and growled in a low voice. However, unlike these people, Chu Feng didn't think that extreme martial had given up. Instead, he felt the threat of death, and even his hair stood on end. This was a strong intuition that alerted him and didn't let down his guard. Sure enough, the moment extreme martial sighed, the heaven and earth collapsed. A cloud of mist rushed up from the training ground, bringing with it an incomparably powerful vitality. It was a lotus that was only 1 foot tall, but it was astonishing. It was wrapped in primal chaos and seemed to be cast from red mother gold. There was a flower bud on it, but the petals were closed and hadn't bloomed yet. As soon as this lotus appeared, it seemed to have disturbed the heavens' secrets. This entire world was actually trembling and shaking violently. At the same time, billions of miles away, in an unknown area, a white-haired woman suddenly opened her eyes in a cave. In front of her, there was also a plant wrapped in white mist that was slightly swaying. If the oldest person was here, he would definitely be able to recognize that this was the extreme martial teacher. Her origin was shocking. She was the martial madman's most beloved disciple, and also his youngest disciple. My disciple is in trouble, but it's too far away. It's too late. Although she had a head full of white hair, her appearance was extremely young and beautiful. Her eyes were filled with struggle and hesitation, but she still made her move in the end. She took out an item from the strange soil under the plant and slowly injected it with energy. Boom! Black light soared into the sky and illuminated the world. As soon as this item moved, it affected the heaven's secret. Even the martial madman in the far north opened his eyes and muttered to himself, "How can I touch it so easily? This is a disaster." Buzz. Perhaps not many people in the Yang realm could sense it, but some changes had really taken place. There was an abnormal and terrifying aura circulating. Is there still a trace of me in this world? After waiting for so many eras, I've finally captured the aura of that world. I want to return. Following that, a loud laughter shook the ages. It was unknown where this creature was and which era he was in. Ha ha, did you think that by not thinking about me and letting the world forget about me, you could erase everything and isolate me? But I saw it just now. That place is called the Yang Realm. I've finally found my way back by stepping on the Emperor Bone. Third Sect Master. Chapter 1427. The heavens collapsed, and the earth exploded. Tai Wu let out a long sigh of disappointment and carried out his final struggle in despair. In a split second, the wails of ghosts and deities resounded. Endless energy and ghostly apparitions prostrated themselves in the depths of the earth, prostrating themselves before the scarlet lotus. Meanwhile, countless deities, Buddhas and demons appeared in the sky, chanting sutras together. The sounds of chanting and demonic words lingered on endlessly, creating a grand scene. This kind of heavenly phenomenon shocked everyone. The scarlet lotus that appeared seemed to be cast from mother gold. It was only a foot tall, but it was too special. It actually triggered the sacrifices of Buddhas and demons, and the wails of ghosts and deities were unimaginable. It was wrapped in dense chaotic energy, rushing out from the cracked Tao field as if it wanted to absorb all of the essence of the 9 heavens and 10 earths. It was obvious that Tai Wu had gone mad. He didn't want to be defeated and die. He didn't want to become a youth with astonishing achievements and glory. Who was he? Heavenly Lord Tai Wu. His title contained the word Wu, so how could he be ordinary? He had the will to devour the heavens and walk the path of a peerless overlord. In his despair, he used his final trump card. This lotus had a great origin and was related to the secret of his Tao attainment. However, he had given it up and used it to kill his opponent. I am Tai Wu. Even if I die, I still need to sacrifice myself with the blood of the heavens. How can I fall at the hands of a ghost from a small netherworld? Today, even if my Tao foundation collapses, I will strangle you and cut off your future path. Tai Wu was ruthless. His eyes carried a faint bloody light, and his long hair danced in the wind, bringing about streaks of lightning one after another. His entire being became fierce, as if he was a great exterminator who wanted to destroy everything. In his eyes, this opponent was too young. He was just a youth who had only cultivated for a short period of time, yet he wanted to kill a heavenly venerable in front of everyone? If he died like this, it would be too shameful. His entire life's fame would go down the drain, and all the dignity and prestige he had fought for would be shattered. He would be ridiculed by later generations. The foot-tall scarlet lotus swayed, and the void collapsed. It seemed to carry the power to destroy the world as it rushed towards Chu Feng. What is this thing? Many people cried out in alarm. They didn't expect that such a plant would appear in the world. It made all the evolvers feel fear. That is the foundation of Tai Wu, a strange lotus for achieving the Tao. A heavenly venerable side. That is a treasure that leads to great existences. It isn't easy to obtain even a single stalk. Meanwhile, this scarlet lotus is one of the best among them, a rare treasure. Another Empyrean transmitted sound. Everyone understood what this was. The foundation of Tai Wu's Tao. Even in the Yang realm, it was very difficult to find pollen and strange fruits that could lead to almighty beings. Otherwise, there would be many more almighty beings in the world. Moreover, most importantly, it was even more difficult to find pollen and mutant fruits that were compatible with one's body, and they all required great luck. As a person, they could only depend on one luck. Of such luck, what was the origin of the Imperial Martial Academy's Crimson Lotus? There was actually such a world-shocking heavenly phenomenon, making one feel intimidated just from looking at it. Heavens! What am I seeing? That's the legendary peerless Tao attainment object transplanted from the Mother Gold mine. It's emitting the aura of Mother Gold. Heavens! What am I seeing? This is a legendary supreme Tao item that was transplanted from a Mother Gold mine. It is emitting the aura of Mother Gold. It is a priceless treasure. The gray-haired heavenly venerable cried out in alarm. There was fear and greed in his eyes. This was an unimaginable plant. No wonder it was so powerful. When it came to Mother Gold, it was naturally a treasure in the eyes of the various powerhouses. It could be used to refine a Tao weapon in the future. The plants that occasionally grew beside Mother Gold were all rare items. The effects of their pollen and fruits were unimaginable, far surpassing plants of the same level. Everyone could see that Tai Wu was throwing caution to the wind. He wanted to use the foundation of the Tao to destroy indiscriminately. You think you can kill me like this? Why bother? Why bother? Chu Feng shook his head. He didn't think this could do anything to him. However, he was also shocked. Apart from the pollen and mutant fruits in the special regions of the Yang realm, those legendary plants that took root in the Mother of Gold or were born in the chaotic realm were also shocking. Once one obtained them, one's life would be rewritten. Even though this wasn't a Tao lotus that had taken root in Mother Gold, but a scarlet lotus that was born in ore, it was still extraordinary enough to shock the world. Rumble! It carried the aura of the great Tao and the Tao rhythm of gods, Buddhas, and devils. Accompanied by the chanting of sutras, the scarlet lotus suppressed over. It was actually difficult to evade. Its void image was everywhere. Its natural laws were everywhere. This moved Chu Feng. It was worthy of being a wondrous lotus. Legend had it that plants like lotuses were innately compatible with the Tao. They carried the formless laws of the Tao. That was why whenever this type of plant appeared in the world, it would be exceptionally shocking. Boom! Chu Feng launched an attack, blasting towards the sky. However, that plant shook and spat out auspicious energy. Scarlet multicolored light shot towards Chu Feng in 30,000 streaks, submerging him and neutralizing his divine light attack. One had to bear in mind that the divine light he released tore apart the heavens. Hundreds and thousands of divine chains of order interweaved. If other heavenly deities came, they would be restricted and killed. However, this lotus only shook lightly, yet it possessed such divine might. It was truly shocking. It really isn't simple. Chu Feng sighed. He had long been moved and revealed an incomparably solemn expression. After the foot-tall scarlet lotus rose from the ground, wisps of mother gold qi and chaotic qi flowed out. It actually gave off an incomparably heavy feeling, as if it was going to crush the world. There was an explosive sound between the heavens and the earth as it crossed the sky. "Go," Chu Feng said coldly. He used the wonderful seven treasures technique. In an instant, an expanse of colorful light flew out and swept over. It was as if a colorful sun had appeared. Thousands of natural laws and tens of thousands of auras filled the air as it attacked the wondrous lotus. Rumble! A loud sound rang out between the heavens and the earth. It was the cry of Tao, but also the roar of gods and devils. All kinds of Buddhas and devils around the wondrous lotus surged and undulated. All kinds of natural law fragments danced wildly. That was caused by the impact of the wonderful seven treasures technique. The two collided with each other and continuously obliterated each other. Tai Wu's expression was ugly and bitter. He was extremely unwilling. After closing his eyes, he suddenly opened them again. His expression was very frightening. He really couldn't accept it. His foundation of achieving Tao, the scarlet lotus that he had nurtured for who knew how many years, finally couldn't see the opportunity for the flower bud to bloom. But now, his dream was shattered. He had long since nurtured himself and was prepared to attack the path of Tao within 100 years and become a mighty figure. But now, his foundation was about to be destroyed. Go! He made a resolute decision. The flower bud of the scarlet lotus began to bloom. Sparkling petals danced in the air, and they were actually stained with blood. Then, bundles of divine chains of order fell from the flower, locking down the heaven and earth, and extending towards Chu Feng. One could see the figures of Buddhas, devils, immortals, ghosts, and other figures all appearing. They all sat cross-legged around the wondrous lotus. As the flower bloomed, they chanted and roared at the same time. "This is completely destroying the foundation." A celestial venerable let out a long sigh. It was unknown if he was shocked or if he was very sad because the rabbit had died. In this world, if a divine king wanted to become an celestial venerable, it was already quite good if 1 out of 10 succeeded. Meanwhile, if an celestial venerable wanted to become a celestial venerable, it was already quite good if 1 out of 100 succeeded. One has to understand that celestial venerable existences all slaughtered their way out of an army of thousands, and only then did they finally reach their current level. Meanwhile, when they rushed upwards, the final few steps were 1 out of 100. Just how difficult was this? All who failed died, not even 1 out of 100. Just how lamentable was this? Of course, this was still under the circumstances that everything went smoothly, finding the foundation of achieving Tao ahead of time, collecting pollen and mutant fruits at the great figure level. Tai Wu's ambitions were great, having the will to devour the heavens. He found a wondrous lotus that was born at the side of the mother gold. If he succeeded, he would definitely far surpass others. Unfortunately, it was already at the critical moment, yet he was forced to let this lotus bloom ahead of time. It wasn't for his own evolution, but rather to release this plant's endless potential ahead of time. It can actually be used like this. Chu Feng was shocked. After the flower bud bloomed ahead of time, there was no pollen that flew outwards, instead completing the mother plant itself. This was caused by Tai Wu's refinement. That plant surged with mist, the mother plant releasing the pressure of a great figure. Boom! The crimson lotus violently trembled, blasting towards Chu Feng. Destroying the foundation of achieving Tao and using this wondrous lotus to kill me? What a pity, it isn't a true great figure after all. It is only pregnant with wisps of strange power. Chu Feng sneered. However, he indeed felt a tremendous pressure, and this was the first time he had encountered such a situation. There was no pollen flying, and the plant itself absorbed the essence, releasing the pressure of a great figure. Chu Feng's entire body surged with essence energy. With the diamond chakram in hand, he suddenly smashed it out. This was a 33-layered heaven weapon, and even in the face of this kind of pressure, he still dared to directly attack it. Pfft! At the critical moment, when Tai Wu refined the wondrous lotus, he actually spat out a large mouthful of blood. This was caused by the scarlet lotus absorbing his essence energy. Tai Wu knew that he had no way of becoming a great figure at the moment, so he forcefully activated this lotus and allowed it to obtain a portion of that level of power. In the end, it consumed too much essence energy and injured his foundation. This even caused the scarlet lotus to sway. At the same time, Chu Feng's diamond chakram struck over, and a resplendent brilliance illuminated the entire world. Boom! It was as if the universe had collapsed and the heavens had split open. The diamond chakram and the lotus collided, and divine chains of order rushed into the sky, causing the entire area to instantly boil. Very soon, the diamond chakram reversed and flew over from the impact. Chu Feng hurriedly received it, afraid that it would be seized by others. In the end, he let out a muffled groan as he was struck back. His body swayed, and he held it in his hand with great difficulty. On the other side, the scarlet lotus issued a cracking sound and actually broke into pieces. Tai Wu let out a loud cry and continuously coughed out blood, his face as pale as paper. Master! Ancestor! On the horizon, the Tai Wu department's disciples all cried out in alarm. Their faces were deathly pale, and their hearts were about to stop beating. Even this can't kill that youth. Everyone was shocked. That was a wisp of a great figure's pressure, yet it actually couldn't suppress this person. Everyone revealed a fiery gaze as they looked at the diamond chakram, but of course there was even more fear. This was too astonishing. In the end, it's not a great figure. It's just an inanimate object, and moreover, it only has wisps of a great figure's power. Yet it wants to kill me? Chu Feng sneered. However, his heart fiercely contracted as he felt an intense uneasiness. His fiery eyes burned brightly as he stared ahead. He felt that something was very strange, and that something was very wrong. Tai Wu's face was ashen. He knew that his future path had been cut off. The priceless treasure that he had cultivated for so many years and was incomparably compatible with him had been destroyed. Originally, he would have become a great figure in less than 100 years, but now everything had been for naught. Ah, my fame in my life has been swept to the ground. Today, my brilliant future has all become an illusion. I'm not reconciled, he said with a trembling voice. His face was ashen as if he had lost all of his spirit. However, Chu Feng became increasingly uneasy. Then, he suddenly took out the stone jar and blocked in front of him. He shouted, "You old thief, you still want to assassinate me? Dream on." He had a premonition that extreme danger was approaching. Tai Wu's attitude was most likely to make him let down his guard. At the same time, he finally saw a rice grain-sized tile between the roots of the shattered scarlet lotus. It was different from the others and carried an ominous aura. It was mixed with soil and other things as it silently flew towards him. If it wasn't for his super fiery eyes, he wouldn't have noticed that this was a damaged tile because it was similar to other stone chip. It was unknown how many tribulations it had experienced throughout the years. It was already a miracle that it could survive until today. In an instant, Chu Feng's mind was completely focused. He actually felt that it had existed for who knew how many epochs. Boom! The stone jar in Chu Feng's hand trembled and collided with the rice grain-sized tile, emitting a dazzling brilliance. This almost made the heaven and earth annihilate. Tai Wu was overwhelmed. He was puzzled and shocked when he saw the stone jar in Chu Feng's hand. In the end, his eyes were filled with endless greed and too much regret. Even though the stone jar was different from before, and was no longer a cube, Tai Wu still guessed at the last moment that this was most likely the supreme treasure that had been lost in the Yang realm. That tile exploded. Although it was only the size of a rice grain, it contained a world-shaking energy. However, all the energy was absorbed by the stone jar. This shocked Chu Feng. How could a rice grain-sized tile be like this? It even made the stone jar shake a few times. It was too shocking. At the same time, he saw at the last moment that this tile had a certain characteristic similar to the stone jar, but its aura was a lot weaker. Could it be an artifact from the same era? At the same time, the heaven and earth rumbled. Tai Wu's master, that white-haired almighty, was moving millions and millions of kilometers away. Her Tao-achieving plant was uprooted, and there was actually a tile under its root. However, her tile was much larger and was an inch long. There were many strange patterns engraved on it as if it carried the Tao of the heavens. Tai Wu's tile was bestowed by her in the past. It was precisely because of the inexplicable attraction between the two tiles of different sizes that Tai Wu's master, that white-haired almighty, immediately sensed that her disciple was in danger. Now, she was constantly activating it, wanting to use this tile to break through the barrier of space and cross millions of kilometers to provide assistance. At this moment, what made her heart tremble was that a stone statue in her cave residence, the statue of the martial madman, was shaking violently and issuing a solemn warning. Disciple, you've provoked a great disaster. You can't activate it anymore. Otherwise, everything in this world will cease to exist and the myriad worlds will wither away. There are some creatures that even the heavens can't bury and even time can't kill or obliterate. They are invincible and no one can do anything about them. The only thing they can do is not think about them and wait for them to fall into eternal silence and never find their way back. If there is someone in this world who is still thinking about him, still touching a grain of dust or a piece of soil that is related to him, it will trigger karma. As long as there is a strand of thought about him in the world, it can guide him and let him return. These were the words of the martial madman. He was revered as the martial emperor among the disciples and was high and mighty. But today, he actually had such an attitude. The white-haired woman shuddered. In her impression, her master, the martial madman, who was known as the martial emperor, was a man of few words. At most, he would give a few words of criticism. However, today, he had hurriedly said so many words of warning, which really frightened her. I didn't think about it, allowed it to fall into seclusion, gradually falling, but today it's going to be troublesome. The creature that returned while stepping on the emperor bone, no one can keep it in check. Perhaps it will appear. The martial madman muttered to himself in the extreme north. He was in seclusion when he opened his deep eyes. At his side was an earthenware jar. Even though it was damaged, only a large half remaining, it was only the height of a palm. However, one could see endless profound mysteries on the surface of the earthenware jar. All types of creatures' diagrams were carved densely, all of them supreme and powerful. The martial madman's heart throbbed as he said, "This is the Emperor's suppression jar, and also a coffin. As long as one doesn't think about it, that living being should be exiled forever and buried in one's thoughts. Who would have thought that it would still cause trouble in the end? That living being hasn't completely fallen yet." Sogu. Chapter 1428. Tai Wu's face was ashen. At this moment, he really didn't have any spirit left in him. Even that strange tile had exploded and turned into a pile of powder. How could he still resist? That was his ultimate trump card. After so many years, He had almost never used it because it was too important. Even his master, that almighty being, had solemnly warned him not to use it recklessly. Although this object was only the size of a grain of rice, it contained the aura of an extreme powerhouse in the heavens, and buried within it was a supreme secret. But today, he fought to the death and used his essence, energy, and spirit to refine it, but he was still defeated. That strange object had exploded. This was really unimaginable. In Tai Wu's opinion, it should have been able to kill his opponent, but the terrifying fragment that was enough to slaughter a great sect was actually destroyed. Tai Wu's mouth was stained with blood. He sighed in disappointment and frustration. There is always regret in life. I once trampled through the wasteland of the little underworld and regarded ghosts as excrement insects. I killed them like weeds on the roadside. I never thought that the chickens and dogs of the past would actually cut off my path and harm my destiny. How sad. When Chu Feng heard this, his face turned cold. This wasn't just Tai Wu's domineering attitude in the past, but it was also his extreme contempt for the little underworld. Excrement insects, weeds, chickens and dogs, there wasn't a single good word to say. This evaluation came from the bottom of his heart. Saying that he looked down on them was far from enough to describe his attitude and humiliation. What are you pretending to be? The instant Chu Feng took a step forward, he struck out with his palm. In the dazzling brilliance, he broke through Tai Wu's defense, penetrated his domain, and hit Tai Wu's face. Tai Wu was sent flying on the spot, and his face was covered in blood. With a rumble, energy surged. A palm strike on the face of an Empyrean. There was nothing more convincing than this action. Tai Wu's sorrow and resentment were interrupted. After suffering such a slap, his ash-white face was instantly flushed with blood. His entire body felt like it was about to explode. This was too humiliating. Ah! Tai Wu roared, and the blood in his body was boiling. Losing was fine, but being bullied and suppressed like this again and again made him, an Empyrean, unable to bear it. He took a deep breath and turned his killing intent and anger into fighting spirit. Even if he knew that he didn't have much fighting strength left, he still wanted to fight to the death. Chu Feng appeared quite indifferent. Around him, there was a rumbling explosion. Black cracks appeared around his body one after another and spread out. This was the result of the extremely powerful energy emitted by his body, and it also indicated his attitude. He did not conceal his killing intent, and once again, he unhurriedly attacked, forcing Tai Wu. "Master! Patriarch!" A few people cried out from the horizon. They were all Imperial Martial Sect's disciples and Grand Disciples. Their faces were deathly white, and they felt fear inside. Even such a powerful heavenly deity creature wasn't this youth's opponent. It was just too terrifying, making all of the sect's disciples feel uneasy. Bang! With a muffled sound, Tai Wu retreated. He staggered backwards from the shockwave of energy, and blood flowed out of his mouth and nose. Chu Feng was indifferent. Facing this Empyrean life form that was destined to die, he didn't have the slightest bit of mercy or pity. The battle of the past was just too miserable. Almost all of Chu Feng's old friends and family were wiped out, brutally erased by the high and mighty Tai Wu, not a single one left. When he thought of that period of time, the depths of Chu Feng's heart still pounded. He was the only one left alive, living a miserable life. For the sake of revenge, he didn't hesitate to take the initiative to enter the other side, doing everything he could to learn the little 6 Dao time technique, absorbing the inauspicious gray matter, turning himself into something that was neither human nor ghost. In the end, he paid an unimaginable price. He himself was almost muddle-headed, almost completely buried. Only when he was on the path of reincarnation did he use the stone millstone to crush his body, grinding up his flesh inch by inch, enduring the world's most unendurable pain. Only by borrowing the power of the clay idol that guarded the final path did he refine the strange gray matter. All of this was for the sake of revenge, to improve himself regardless of the price. Now, Chu Feng finally stood in front of Tai Wu, beating him until he coughed out blood, leaving him in despair. Tai Wu, letting you directly destroy me is letting you off too lightly, Chu Feng said coldly. He turned into a streak of silver lightning, throwing himself over. His human king blood surged, brilliant brilliance burning, roasting the world. His entire body released astonishing energy fluctuations. Hong. Tai Wu passively faced the attack. Blood energy rushed into the heavens, his hair dancing about chaotically. Fist imprints collided. However, his body had long been seriously injured, his vital energy almost completely exhausted when activating the Scarlet Lotus. How could he block this young great enemy whose aura was like a rainbow? At this moment, in his eyes, this was a young emperor. With a dong sound, Tai Wu was sent flying with serious injuries, his entire arm spasming. As for his palm, it was covered in cracks, about to explode under this strike. Chu Feng's fist imprint was too domineering, as if it was going to break through the undying, obtain eternity, destroy everything in its path. You! Tai Wu was furious. This life was too glorious, rarely encountering any enemies. Not only was he strong enough, his sect was world-shaking as well. But now, he was actually going to fall like a clay chicken or pottery dog. He was in such a sorry state, walking into his most miserable later years. Today, his opponent definitely wouldn't let him go. In the past, it was always him who chased after his enemies, enjoying the thrill of hunting. Yet now, he was in such a sorry state, just like those opponents he slaughtered in the past, powerless to stop them. His heart was bleak, his hair disheveled as he retreated. It was truly lamentable. However, he definitely wouldn't resign himself to death. Even if he died, he still had to release his final brilliance, ignite his true body and fight to the end. Only then would he live up to his reputation. However, he thought too much. What was the so-called reputation when he was alive worth? If one died, no matter how brilliant their past was, it was nothing more than flowing water, a withering flower in the mirror. Hong. Tai Wu flew out, his entire body covered in cracks. Just now, Chu Feng's kick had shattered his body-protecting barrier, and his entire body felt as if it had been struck by a divine lord. He was almost killed. How lamentable, how lamentable! To think that I, Tai Wu, would roam unhindered through the world for an entire lifetime, yet I'm actually going to fall like this. I'm truly unwilling. He roared in a low voice, his gaze like that of a wolf, carrying resentment and ruthlessness, but even more resentment and coldness. Chu Feng moved forward once more. With a raise of his hand, endless brilliance was produced. Streak after streak of divine chains interweaved, releasing clanging sounds as they collided with each other. It was like the laws of a Tao ancestor, the order of heaven and earth. They were like metal chains that traversed this place, colliding and releasing sparks, real and terrifying. Ren Tai Wu exhausted all of his energy and all of his comprehensions, releasing his most powerful attack. In an instant, a phenomenon flashed past. Lightning appeared in the void, golden lotuses covered the ground, and gods and devils howled as they attacked together with him. However, what could they do? In Chu Feng's surroundings, brilliance shot into the heavens. He was like an undefeatable ultimate being that crushed over, like the dusk of the gods had arrived. Under a single fist, all techniques were destroyed. After the brilliance of Chu Feng's attack reached its peak, it quickly dimmed, suppressing everything like the last remnants of a blood-dyed sunset. This was truly the dusk of the gods, the end of the Tao path of a heavenly sovereign. Ah! Tai Wu screamed miserably. One of his arms disintegrated, turning into a bloody mist. Then, half of his body broke apart inch by inch, unable to endure Chu Feng's most powerful attack. Bang! Chu Feng attacked once more. The human king domain confined everything, binding Tai Wu. Tai Wu's body that was originally disintegrating immediately stopped, and he was fixed in place. I hate it. Why didn't I exterminate all the ghosts back then and get rid of all the weeds? Ah! Taiwu cried out loudly. His hair was disheveled, and his face was full of humiliation and despair. Stop, let my master go. Back then, he left you with your life. An Taiwu disciple rushed over and shouted loudly. Chu Feng was expressionless. With a flip of his hand, his right hand was like an immemorial divine mountain, instantly covering the sky. This hand was too large, covering the sky and the earth, boundlessly majestic. This was the Hung King's method, truly covering the sky with a single hand. Not only in terms of form, but also in terms of laws and order. Covered this place, covering the sky and the earth. This disciple wasn't weak, and it could even be said that he was very strong. He had reached the Divine King domain more than 10 years ago, but in front of the Hung King level energy, what did he count for? He disappeared on the spot, leaving behind a dark red expanse. Both his body and soul had perished. Stop! Taiwu roared loudly. His mouth was full of bloody foam, and his eyes were cold. However, he was helpless because he couldn't stop Chu Feng. Back then, was it you who left me with my life? If I hadn't fallen into the great abyss, I would have died without a corpse. Your disciples are just like you, still wanting to be righteous at this kind of juncture? Laughable. In the end, strength is what matters in this world. Chu Feng's slap landed on Tai Wu's face. Tai Wu, who had been confined within the human king's domain, was immediately sent flying. His face was deformed, and the bones inside were shattered. More than a dozen of his teeth were knocked out. Then, Chu Feng caught up, grabbing Tai Wu's neck with one hand and slapping him with the other. Pa, pa, pa! Chu Feng continuously attacked, slap after slap, all of them landing solidly on Tai Wu's face. Blood splattered everywhere. Tai Wu felt like he was about to explode. He was completely angry, and his entire body was trembling. This was the other side deliberately holding back and not killing him. Everything was to slap the heavenly venerable's face. This was truly an undisguised humiliation. You! Stop! On the horizon, someone shouted from among the Tai Wu's disciples. Their faces were filled with fear, anger, and resentment. This was truly a great humiliation to their sect. Tai Wu was the sect master, yet someone came to their sect like this, grabbed his neck, and violently beaten in front of everyone. His face was split open. Where was the heavenly venerable's face? This was even more terrifying than being killed. Noisy! Chu Feng coldly glanced at him. With a raise of his hand, a giant hand that blotted out the sun expanded to dozens of miles long. Then, it rapidly spread out, covering the horizon. Rumble! When it gently covered the world shook and space was torn apart. The disciples who had just spoken fell down like dumplings and then exploded in midair. Stop right there! Tai Wu roared. Not only were these people important to him, but there were also his bloodline descendants, but they were killed in front of him. Aren't heavenly venerables all high and mighty beings? They think they are indifferent and can look down on everything. Why are you so anxious? Chu Feng lifted Tai Wu and said, Right now, I'm just letting you experience the feeling of having your relatives killed, and you can't bear it? Forget it, I don't want to start a massacre, and I don't want to pretend to be cold-blooded and heartless. Let's end it like this. As Chu Feng spoke, the giant hand that he had stretched out gently shook, and all the God-King domain-level beings of the Tai Wu lineage disintegrated and died a violent death. The other low-level disciples turned pale and fell to the ground in a daze. Their bodies trembled, and their hearts were filled with extreme fear. All of them lay on the ground, unable to move. Puff! At the same time, under Chu Feng's attack, Tai Wu's physical body completely collapsed. A gust of wind blew, and the blood mist dissipated, leaving only a dim soul light. A famous heavenly venerable of a generation was about to die like this. In the distance, the gray-haired Heavenly Venerable and the golden-haired Heavenly Venerable, who were close to Tai Wu, felt a chill run down their spines. Their hearts were trembling, and they were deeply frightened. My disciple is about to die. Billions of miles away, on the beautiful face of the white-haired woman who was stopped by the martial madman, a dark red Tao pattern appeared on her glabella. She sensed part of the situation through the tile in her hand. I have no choice but to take action. I have to protect Tai Wu's true spirit and send him to the path of reincarnation so that he can reincarnate with his memories. She couldn't hold back in the end and acted decisively. The tile in her hand glowed and light particles filled the air. They were sparkling like a rain of flowers. They didn't look very resplendent, but they could interfere with the battlefield billions of miles away. Boom! The void trembled. Tai Wu's rice grain-sized tile had long been shattered into powder, but now it was actually reassembling in the void. All the fragments reassembled and were about to reappear. At the same time, the ethereal voice of the female Almighty came from the void. Whoever dares to hurt my disciple, leave behind your soul light, and I'll let you go. He ha ha. Chu Feng sneered. He wasn't afraid even after seeing such a strange phenomenon. Instead, he took a step further and attacked. Moreover, he took a step further and stared at the martial madman. The Earthlings want you dead in the middle of the night. So what if the martial madman comes? As he spoke, he shook lightly, and Tai Wu's soul light shattered into pieces and disintegrated. He was responding to the female Almighty with his actions. How dare you? The white-haired Almighty was furious. Why wouldn't I dare? What can you do to me from billions of miles away? Chu Feng sneered. Chapter 1429. Why wouldn't I dare? Chu Feng flipped his hand as he spoke. The great marshal's soul light that was already in pieces shattered into a rain of light and exploded on the spot. If the soul light was extinguished, everything would come to an end. He didn't even need to think about going back to life, let alone reincarnating with his memories. He would die here for all eternity. Boom! Millions of miles away, the white-haired woman's beautiful face was full of chilliness. The Tao pattern between her brows shone like a vertical eye as it urged the tiles to rumble. In an instant, the rain of light was like a tide. It passed through the void and actually surged over from millions of miles away. This kind of scene was too terrifying. In this Tao field, the shattered tile reappeared and shot toward Chu Feng. Cover up all traces, don't think. In the Yang realm, in the extreme north, the martial madman's hair and beard were standing on end. He was like a world-destroying lion king that had awakened from a deep slumber as he chanted incantations to warn his disciple. Millions of miles away, the white-haired woman exploded with a bang as the dazzling rain of light exploded. Traces of blood flowed from the corner of her mouth as 5 colored bloodstains sparkled. Master! The female Almighty was filled with regret, unwillingness, and even anger and murderous intent toward Chu Feng. However, she didn't dare to go against the martial madman's will. She isolated the inch-long tile and no longer used its might. Chu Feng grabbed the stone jar. Everything was ready, but he discovered that the energy transmitted by the white-haired woman had weakened. It could be said to have started anticlimactic, but ended poorly. Crack! At the same time, among the fragments of the great marshal's soul light, the core piece emitted a light sound as it accelerated its shattering and continuously turned into fine powder. Master! Celestial Venerable! The great martial lineage's disciples all cried out as they watched the celestial venerable of this generation turn into ashes. Even his soul was about to scatter and disappear completely. They were all terrified. Ancestral Master, please save the celestial venerable. Some people shouted, wanting to ask the female Almighty who was separated by millions of miles to take action and save the last wisp of the great marshal's soul light. However, the white-haired woman was powerless. How could she take action from millions of miles away if she didn't use the shattered tiles to sense each other? At this time, she directly moved, ending her seclusion, tore through the void, and rushed over. Unfortunately, the distance was too far. It was a distance of millions of kilometers, and she needed to make many transfers along the way. This land of the living was too mysterious and bizarre, and no one could pass through it in one go. All experts knew that they couldn't force it. If they were to directly and completely traverse the world of the living, it would surely bring about inauspiciousness in the end, and there would be a great calamity that would befall them. Since ancient times, not many people have been able to avoid it. According to legend, the Yang realm was connected to too many mysterious places. There was the most ancient and unpredictable prehistoric hell, the River of Souls, and the burial pit of the Celestial Emperor. If he were to forcefully pass through the entire Yang realm, he might attract the energy corrosion of these strange lands. There might even be unpredictable creatures that would revive and fill the air with killing intent. Hee. Chu Feng sneered. In the female great expert's ears, this sounded like mockery and ridicule, a wanton provocation towards her. It was just too insolent. Xiao. Suddenly, an expanse of morning multicolored light rushed out from Tai Wu's shattered soul light. It was extremely dazzling and extremely divine, as if the sun had just risen. It was full of vigor and auspicious colors. 10,000 rays of light surged violently. Then, a purple talisman flew out in an attempt to escape. This gave Chu Feng a shock, and he quickly reacted. He grabbed it and pinched it in his hand. He couldn't break free no matter how hard it attacked. A talisman that can bring a person's true spirit to reincarnate. Back then, the first time he came into contact with this thing was on the reincarnation road. Every soul body carried a talisman and could reincarnate with their memories. Tai Wu actually had one on him as well, and it was hidden in the deepest part of the core of his soul light. Now, it was bringing a bit of his true spirit to escape as he wanted to charge towards the reincarnation road. It's a pity that you ran into me. Chu Feng's expression was cold and indifferent as he forcefully wiped this purple talisman. A mournful and miserable shriek came from it. No. A wisp of spiritual light emerged and revealed Tai Wu's pale face. This was his ultimate trump card. Even if he was killed, he still had a chance to reincarnate. Moreover, he would bring along his memories. It wouldn't be many years before he reappeared in the Yang realm. But now, everything was in vain because he ran into Chu Feng. Leave a bit of my true spirit and not bring along my past life's memories. I will bid farewell to this life forever. From now on, I will no longer be a cultivator, and I will never seek revenge on you. More than 90% of Tai Wu's true spirit had disappeared, and he cried out weakly. He really didn't want to completely turn into nothingness. Even if he left behind some true spirit particles without any memories, it was still possible for him to return after thousands of lifetimes. If he died forever now, then there really wouldn't be a trace of hope. This wisp of true spirit was quickly annihilated by Chu Feng's hand. Tai Wu was completely dying forever in the Yang realm. Even if a terrifying existence as strong as the martial madman gathered his soul and personally received him, it was impossible for him to appear again. Actually, dying like this isn't necessarily a kind of blessing. If you were alive, it would be a fate worse than death. Chu Feng said coldly. With a bang, Tai Wu's true spirit was burned into nothingness, and nothing was left. From then on, he was forever erased from the Yang realm, and there was no longer his Tao fruit in the world. Originally, Chu Feng left Tai Wu's true spirit behind and placed it in a soul lamp to be tortured and refined at all times. He wanted to use this torture to force out the secrets of the martial madman's lineage. However, after thinking about it, this lineage's inheritance was too astonishing, and there were many experts in the sect who were still alive in this world. Only God knew if that female almighty would find him because of this. Not to mention that there was an even more terrifying martial madman. Therefore, Chu Feng changed his mind and directly slaughtered Tai Wu. He held the talisman in his hand and looked at it again and again. Finally, he suddenly swung the stone jar and smashed it down, causing it to explode. If one didn't consider the karma behind the talisman, this was a good thing. It could allow one to reincarnate with memories, and it could be considered a priceless treasure even in the Yang realm. However, Chu Feng was afraid of this thing, worried that there was a special aura left behind by the martial madman's lineage. I have no use for it now. Moreover, the water behind the talisman is too deep, and there must be great karma. Thinking of this, Chu Feng frowned. He still couldn't see through this pool of water, and it was very terrifying. In the distance, the others watched with their hearts throbbing in pain. They felt that their souls were bleeding, and they felt that it was a pity. That was a priceless decree that could allow one to pass through the path of reincarnation without obstruction. It was actually destroyed just like that. A bone-chilling sneer came from the void. It was extremely strange and terrifying, and the exploded talisman reassembled and reappeared. However, it didn't stop. It silently penetrated into the void and disappeared. This thing really has a great secret and great karma. I really don't know how it ended up in this world. Chu Feng's heart palpitated. These were all produced from some special forbidden areas, but who made them? And there was a considerable number of forbidden areas that clearly had nothing to do with this talisman. Originating from the forbidden areas was just the appearance. Chu Feng himself had come into contact with this kind of thing many times. In the future, when he evolved to a high enough level, he might even be involved again. All of this happened in a short instant. Great Martial Heavenly Venerable was killed, and his Tao fruit was erased from the Yang realm. Not far away, the gray-haired Heavenly Venerable's hair stood on end because he saw Chu Feng turn around and stare at him. The golden-haired Heavenly Venerable's body was also ice-cold. He felt a chill that came from his soul, and he experienced the young expert's killing intent. Only, Chu Feng didn't take action against them. For him, killing Great Martial was easy, but if he delayed any longer, it would most likely lead to misfortune. Rumble! The great earth split open. This Tao Right's medicinal field was uprooted, and it entered a large hand that covered the sky. It was collected by Chu Feng. Kacha! The mountain range collapsed and was completely destroyed, revealing the secret earth at the bottom. The strange soil that the great martial crimson lotus used to nurture was completely seized, and the sparkling soil entered Chu Feng's heaven overflowing sleeve. He unleashed a great divine ability, and in the blink of an eye, he plundered the most valuable mutant soil and great medicines here. Afterwards, he tried to grab the armory where the scriptures were hidden, but that place directly exploded. The eyes of the great martial lineage's disciples were all red, but what could they do? They couldn't stop him at all. The divine kings among them had all been killed by Chu Feng with a flip of his palm. Who would dare to stop him? Chi! In an instant, the world turned upside down, and all the stars in the sky appeared. Chu Feng instantly stepped into a spatial passage and directly disappeared. He decisively retreated. He couldn't stay for long because the white-haired Almighty was rushing over. In the blink of an eye, he arrived at another province. But he didn't stop. He destroyed the traces in the void and set out once again, setting up a one-way teleportation domain. He disappeared from his original position once again. Before leaving, all the domain patterns were burned and rapidly burned away. Chu Feng moved continuously from one province to another. He crossed and changed over 100 provinces in succession before finally finding a secret place to hide. He held a stone jar in his hand to conceal heaven's secrets and prevent others from divining. When he was weak, he could already use this stone jar to escape from celestial venerables. Now that he was King Hung and could kill celestial venerables, he was naturally more confident that he could use this stone jar to block the divinations of supreme experts. After Chu Feng left, The first to arrive wasn't the white-haired Almighty, but a decree that tore through space and erupted with immortal brilliance. That was a decree that contained the martial madman's killing intent. Unfortunately, the murderer had long since escaped. Even someone as powerful as the martial madman couldn't ignore the laws of the Yang realm. After receiving the news, he didn't dare to directly pass through the Yang realm and only arrived after several transits. The martial madman was now at a critical moment of transformation and couldn't move his true body. His true spirit and Dharma body didn't dare to ignore the Yang realm legend. It would be bad if he attracted the attention of the Celestial Emperor Burial Pit and the other places. On this day, the great martial madman was killed, shocking the world. After so many years, Chu Feng's name finally appeared in the Yang realm. The whole world offers a reward to kill this fiend. On this day, the white-haired Almighty was furious and demanded to kill Chu Feng together. The Yang realm shook violently. The martial madman's faction offering such a reward would cause an unimaginable storm. Come, who's afraid of who? Chu Feng sneered. Chapter 1430. Extra Extra. The Heavenly Morning Post's headline has shaken the Yang realm. The descendant of the martial madman's faction has been killed after his door was breached. The fall of the great marshal shook all directions, and the news naturally spread out at the first possible moment. Big news! The great marshal Heavenly Venerable has been killed by an expert on the front page of the Cloudy Sky newspaper. This has caught everyone's attention. His master, a powerhouse that has existed since the archaic era, has issued a sky-high bounty. The outside world was in an uproar, causing a huge storm. Chu Feng had killed the great martial Heavenly Venerable in a single battle, causing the famous Heavenly Venerable of a generation to die a violent death. Not even a trace of his true spirit could escape. Even his master, the white-haired powerhouse, had tried to intervene but was unable to save him. The great martial Heavenly Venerable actually died just like that. He was killed by a youth in his own Tao field in front of everyone's eyes. This is truly unbelievable. Even the great martial Heavenly Venerable's enemies, those with great backgrounds, were somewhat dumbfounded at this moment. It was difficult for them to recover for a while because this news was too shocking. As a Heavenly Venerable, this kind of creature was very difficult to kill, especially in their own Tao field. That was their home field, and it contained the opportunity and foundation of their Tao attainment. How could the great martial Heavenly Venerable suddenly die? However, this was the truth. It was extremely sudden. The great martial Heavenly Venerable had died. This is somewhat inconceivable. The great martial Heavenly Venerable has been powerful for so many years. It is said that he was cultivating a rare mystical lotus that was rooted in a mother gold mine. It will mature in another 100 years. There was hope of becoming a powerhouse, but he actually died in front of everyone. Some experts with extremely high levels of evolution were astonished and felt that this was beyond their expectations. After all, that was one of the descendants of the martial madman's faction. Ordinary creatures wouldn't dare to act so wantonly and kill the great martial Heavenly Venerable. This news was quite explosive. Who is this person? He's like a fierce dragon crossing the river. He's a complete mess. He actually came to kill the great martial Heavenly Venerable just like that. Isn't he afraid that the powerhouse will go crazy and take revenge? Some people sighed. It was truly the case of the new generation replacing the old in Yangjiang. A new generation of tyrannical and heaven-defying geniuses had appeared. This isn't a newcomer, nor is he a nobody. He already has a certain level of fame in the Yang realm. Oh, who is he? Rumor has it that Tai Wu attacked him in the Lesser Yin realm back then, but he didn't kill him, allowing him to escape. At that time, he was still a small cultivator, not worth mentioning, yet he was able to escape the attack of the Celestial Master. It can be seen that he's not a simple person. There are already signs that he can achieve what he has today. In an instant, as some people discussed, some vague details about Chu Feng's past were revealed. However, I feel like this is a path to death. If a martial emperor carries out a divination, how many people in this world can hide from the heavens? He can't escape and will soon be killed. Someone sneered, coming to this conclusion. I don't think so. It's not like he hasn't been targeted before. According to his past, he has some tricks up his sleeve. Isn't he still alive now? Let's wait and see. He's definitely going to die. We can already start the countdown. At most half a day. I guarantee that he won't live past today. Someone said with certainty. Many people nodded. Some super powerhouses in the Yang realm also felt that if the martial madman carried out a serious divination, not many people could escape. For a moment, many people began to silently calculate the time. They believed that Chu Feng didn't have much time left and was about to become a dazzling shooting star that would fall into darkness after a brief dazzle. However, after waiting for half a day, there was still no news of Chu Feng's death. Some people even caught a glimpse of his figure, and it was obvious that he was still alive and kicking. This made those who vowed that he was going to die speechless, and their faces became hot. Those who could make such a prediction were at least celestial masters, but the result was quite inaccurate. Moreover, not long after, the martial madman's youngest disciple, the white-haired female powerhouse, appeared again and increased the bounty, which really caused people to exclaim in surprise. Heavens, whoever can capture Chu Feng alive, apart from getting the bounty, the female powerhouse also promised to do everything in her power to bring him to see the martial madman. This was a very shocking news. Since the prehistoric era, how many people could have an audience with the madman who had the title of martial emperor? In the eyes of many sect masters, this was like a pilgrimage that needed to be worshipped. This was because once they received the guidance of the martial madman, they would definitely be able to break through the shackles and evolve to a higher level. This was simply a heavenly fate. The people discussed fervently and quickly came to a conclusion that it was most likely inconvenient for the martial madman to make a divination. He should be in closed-door training, otherwise why would he allow that person to live? Only Chu Feng sneered. Moreover, he became more and more confident. He firmly believed that with his current attainment as a Hing King, with the stone jar in his hand, it was enough to conceal the mysteries of heaven. No one could cross time and space to kill him. This is much easier. Chu Feng wore a faint smile. If he were to make a move in the future, he could just brush his sleeves and leave. Even if there were prehistoric old monsters investigating him, what could they do? At the same time, he sighed softly. His own strength was still not strong enough. Otherwise, why would he need to hide and fight with the white-haired powerhouse? When would he be able to fight with the martial madman? If he didn't escape like this, he would have to avoid dozens or hundreds of provinces away. He spat out a mouthful of resentment. If others knew his current thoughts, they would definitely want to give him 2 slaps. How long did you cultivate for? You want to fight a powerhouse and pinch a martial emperor? What are you thinking? Unfortunately, that white-haired powerhouse was millions and millions of miles away at that time. Otherwise, how could the ghost from the Yang realm survive? His corpse would have turned cold long ago. This was a celestial venerable who had a close relationship with Taiwu. He felt regretful and a little disappointed. The famous celestial venerable of their generation was actually easily killed by a junior. It made him feel as if he had experienced it himself and felt slightly bitter. Very soon, the ancient newspaper that was known as the Yang realm's largest circulation published an article. It revealed Chu Feng's origins from many aspects and explained that he was not a simple person. Everyone has underestimated him. I'm afraid this youngster's roots are not simple. When the ancient newspaper mentioned a special event, it immediately moved everyone. Does anyone still remember that there was once a disturbance in the special circle? Some youngsters with extraordinary aptitude were detected to have words carved on their soul light. My uncle is Chu Feng. This kind of information had appeared on the bodies of many astonishingly talented youngsters. It was actually engraved in the depths of their soul light. This phenomenon had once caused a hurricane among the higher-ups of the great sects and shocked everyone. However, in order to prevent the situation from escalating and causing panic, it was suppressed artificially at that time. The news was not allowed to spread and the disturbance was quickly quelled. Now that the old matter was brought up again, it seemed much more serious. That was because the two words, Chu Feng, were too eye-catching. Chu Feng again? Was it the same person? All of a sudden, all the old monsters were guessing and a few powerhouses were drawing in cold breaths. The ancient newspaper interviewed many of the people involved and came into close contact with these geniuses. They understood a few astonishing truths. Many of these youngsters were actually born on the same day and were divided into several batches. It was as if they had agreed to come to the Yang realm together. In addition, some of these youngsters' temperaments were even somewhat similar. In general, they were all very restless. This made many people dumbstruck and gave rise to endless frightening guesses. Chu Feng was speechless after he learned of this. He could only curse inwardly. Could some people not appear on the same day? That was because the corresponding geniuses were all engraved by him in one breath. They were divided into several batches and were all related to how far apart they were on the reincarnation road. Therefore, the date of birth was also one of the few choices. In addition, temperaments? The main thing was that these people were the first to provoke Chu Feng and push and shove at him. They were all thorns, so they were picked out by Chu Feng to have his words engraved. Of course, the factor of a powerful soul light was also taken into consideration later on. However, these kinds of people were innately dishonest. The ancient newspaper came to a conclusion through all kinds of analysis. Chu Feng's background was a bit terrifying and was suspected to be related to the power on the reincarnation road. This immediately caused a monstrous storm. Reincarnation hunters appeared at the first instant the news was published. All the great powers knew that they were a strange power that protected the reincarnation road. They were extremely mysterious and difficult to surmise. This caused the chaos this time to become even greater and the storm became more and more intense. On the same day, Tai newspaper also published an article saying that Chu Feng was very likely the reincarnation of some prehistoric mythological figure. His background was truly too strange. They listed a series of evidence to explain some of Chu Feng's abnormalities. They even believed that he might be the reincarnation of the prehistoric Black Hand Li Su. After this news appeared, there was an immediate uproar. They were incomparably shocked and felt that everything was in complete disorder. Li Su is back. The Black Hand is him? Impossible, how can it be that youth? What the hell? Li Su has become Black Hand Chu? That might really be the case. Look, he's fearless and is directly challenging the martial madman's entire department. If it was someone else who would dare to do this, that's courting death. Only the Black Hand dares to do so. After all, he was the one who smashed the martial madman's black brick back then. He's the only person in history who made the martial madman's scalp bleed. Tai newspaper had great influence and had always been at odds with the ancient newspaper. Both of them believed that they had the highest circulation in the Yang realm, so the competition was fierce. However, it was undeniable that they had the widest audience. After this joint report, it caused a huge wave. Following that, the Black Blood Research Institute also published an article. It was one of the 4 authoritative institutions in the Yang realm regarding evolution. They were probing the various conditions required for Chu Feng to walk the path of King Heng. It can be confirmed that this is a genius. To be able to reach this step, he's almost unrivaled in the world. Throughout history, how many Kings Heng have appeared? When did they appear? This was the evaluation of the Black Blood Research Institute. They gave Chu Feng extremely high praise, and it immediately caused a huge commotion. One had to know that this was one of the truly authoritative institutions. They had all kinds of research and experiments on evolution. They had gathered a large number of old pedants and had a frightening number of talents. If one didn't consider individual combat strength and only focused on theoretical research, the 4 great research institutes were worthy of the title of authoritative. It's not just you guys. Even we, who know all kinds of secrets and have unearthed the truth of history, haven't seen many King Heng in history. So, all the goddesses and geniuses who are praised to the heavens, put away your arrogance. If you really meet King Heng, you're nothing. That's the difference between a swallow and a swan, the difference between a chicken and a dog and a giant dragon. The mouth of a certain old pedant from the Black Blood Research Institute was too poisonous. While he was unrestrainedly praising Chu Feng, he also greatly belittled and attacked many geniuses in the Yang realm. Was he praising Chu Heishou to death? Many people were somewhat suspicious. Of course, there were even more people whose hearts were fluctuating violently. This was a King Heng. This kind of creature was too rare, and it would be difficult to see one even after so many eras. That Chu Feng was so outstanding. If they could rope him into their camp or capture him alive to extract his bloodline for research, that would be a priceless treasure. In any case, Chu Feng's name had shaken the world in a short period of 1 or 2 days. Chu Feng was at the heart of the struggle, and people from all sides were in heated discussion. But what about him now? He was already hundreds of prefectures away from the scene of the incident, and he was secretly thinking about rescuing a person, Ziluan. The maid he had subdued in the Lesser Netherworld, the proud Ziluan of the Purple Phoenix clan, who was usually eccentric, delicate, and conceited, but every time he reprimanded her, she would show a timid and weak attitude. Some time ago, before he went to the Supreme Forbidden Area, he had once discovered a poster of a certain celebrity in the Yang realm. There was actually a birdcage hanging in the luxurious residence of the celebrity. At that time, Chu Feng had recognized at a glance that the spiritual bird in the cage was Ziluan's true form. The once proud girl, the chattering and loyal little maid, had actually been reduced to someone else's caged bird, and was kept in an ice-cold iron cage. At that time, Chu Feng felt that he was not strong enough, and he also vaguely felt that there might be some kind of conspiracy. Otherwise, why would she so coincidentally appear in the poster? Oh, who was it that sensed it in advance and thought that I had already come to the Yang realm at that time? Did they want to deal with me and set up a net to wait for me, wanting me to throw myself into it? Chu Feng pondered, and a murderous look appeared on his face. He said, "You've angered me. Using the people around me as bait, wanting to deal with me, then just wait for me to kill my way to your door. But I can't be hasty. I need to be calm to save someone. I'm not in a hurry, I need to improve my strength first." Chu Feng calmed himself down. He could use the 3 seeds now, and the firmest foundation in the Yang realm had already been firmly established. It was time to let the 3 supreme seeds take root and sprout again. He was looking forward to it very much. The reason why Chu Feng could have today's achievements was all because of the germination and blossoming of one of the 3 seeds. Now, he was going to open up this path again. 3rd Sect Leader. Chapter 1431. The mountain was vast, and the clear spring water sprinkled down. The violet-golden bamboos swayed, and the lustrous leaves rustled as they rubbed against each other. Purple mist diffused, and the spiritual energy was exceptionally dense. Chu Feng stood at the top of the mountain and surveyed the land. He was looking for a suitable place to plant the strange seed in his hand and thus evolve. The outside world was in an uproar and couldn't calm down. The storm this time was very big, especially after the articles published by the major newspapers. It continued to ferment like a hurricane, sweeping and whistling. This involved a young man's magnificent feat of killing a celestial venerable. It also involved the sky-high bounty offered by the Almighty, as well as the martial madman with world-shaking strength. In addition, there were reincarnation hunters and so on. The impact was too great and couldn't be calmed down in a short time. Everyone was evaluating and discussing. My uncle is Chu Feng, a genius girl murmured. In the distance, the girl's master, an elder of a great sect, had a deep gaze and a gloomy expression. He didn't know whether this situation was good or bad, because the future was full of variables. Such a group of people had words engraved on their soul light. After careful thought, it was indeed terrifying. If these people were all related and walked together in the future, it would be quite shocking. After careful thought, this was an entire generation of elite. They were all geniuses, and if they all became members of the same organization, it would simply make one's hair stand on end. In fact, many people were considering this problem. Some people believed that it must be suppressed in advance. If such a future organization were to take shape, just the thought of it sent chills down their spines. As expected, those who dare to oppose the martial madman aren't simple. Their roots are unfathomable. Don't tell me the Black Hand Li Su has really revived and is about to return? Some people had serious expressions. Hee, that's great. Chu Feng, you've come. There were also people laughing with sparkling tears in their eyes. They were somewhat happy, but there were also traces of sorrow. She was Lady Shi. Even her hair was shining. She had bright eyes and white teeth. Her skin was like snow, and she was as ethereal as a fairy. However, when she smiled, her big eyes curved like a little demoness. When she learned that Chu Feng had slaughtered Taiwu alone, she was happy and worried, happy and sad. Thinking of the past and seeing Chu Feng reach this step, she was excited and worried for Chu Feng at the same time. All in all, she was more happy than worried. She knew that Chu Feng wouldn't act recklessly. If he dared to do so, he would definitely be able to protect himself. She had recognized Chao De as Chu Feng in the three-way battlefield. She didn't expect this guy to make such a big move in such a short period of time. Demon Chu, you can do it. The godlike girl will continue to look down on you from the Yang realm. Zhou Shi smiled as she spoke. Her melancholy disappeared, and she became happy. She looked forward to reuniting with Chu Feng. The Zhou clan was known as the sixth clan in the Yang realm. They were boundlessly enormous and possessed unfathomable strength. At this moment, a few old monsters gathered together and discussed in secret. They had long since understood the relationship between their family's eccentric little princess, Zhou Shi, and the devil Chu Feng. This is really great. Brother-in-law, oh no, big brother Chu Feng, you're too awesome. You can actually kill a celestial venerable alone and kill Taiwu in front of everyone. Your talent is unrivaled. Ing Xiaoxiao's eyes were full of little stars as she was excited and moved. The silver-haired Lolita of the past had long since grown into a slender and elegant woman. Her waist-length silver hair fluttered in the wind and her large bright eyes blinked. She was as elegant and beautiful as a fairy. She clenched her elegant fists and her face was full of smiles. This is really bad. It's really him? Ing Wudi's face darkened as he muttered to himself. He looked at his younger sister speechlessly and then glanced at his older sister Ing Zhixian in the distance. From his point of view, he had lost his older sister in the little netherworld. Even though their relationship broke up later on, they still had a name after all. He had to call Chu Feng brother-in-law, but now he had to lose another younger sister? He felt indescribably upset. He really wanted to grab Chu Feng and give him a violent beating. Chu Feng, demon, you really are my blood brother. I can't afford to offend you. Damn it, I only have one older sister and one younger sister in total. Do you want to eat them all up by yourself? I'm so angry. Ing Wudi's face was as black as the bottom of a wok when Chu Feng was mentioned. He was so angry that he couldn't wait to have a decisive battle with Chu Feng. But he was only thinking about it. What kind of joke was this? Even the celestial venerables had been slaughtered by that fellow. He was so ferocious that he was a complete mess. How could he possibly be a match for him? If he really dared to go over, He reckoned that he would be beaten into a dumpling and beaten into a pig's head. Not far away, Ingzhixian was expressionless. She only glanced at him once before looking into the distance. "Il Wu!" A beast's roar came from within the dense fog. In the end, its imposing manner became majestic and turned into a tiger's roar. It shook the entire mountain range, and the endless forest was trembling. This was the ruins of the exotic wilderness tiger race. It was an outstanding and dangerous land, the forest of chaos. Back then, after the Manchurian tiger parted ways with Chu Feng and Old Gu, he traveled far away by himself. His destination was this place. He had been entrenched here for a long time to comprehend everything within the ruins. The exotic wilderness tiger race was too powerful. It was a mutation of the strongest bloodline of the white tiger and the black tiger. After transcending, they were known to be able to eat the heavenly dragon. But it was precisely because they were too terrifying and their bloodline was boundlessly powerful that it was difficult for them to reproduce. They couldn't last for long and had been extinct for a long time. The Manchurian tiger, Old Gu, and Chu Feng all ate the bloodline fruit and were able to transform. That was why the Manchurian tiger found this place. He subdued a few vicious beasts in the process. Today, he received the news and was immediately incomparably excited. His great enmity had been avenged and his brother was unexpectedly so powerful. "Brother, wait for me. When Great Tiger Dong comprehends the supreme scripture of the exotic wilderness tiger race, I won't hold you back when I come into being. I'll help you one day." Great Tiger Dong shouted. The tiger's roar shook the heaven and earth. The entire forest of chaos was violently shaking. The mist that contained the patterns of the great Tao was unceasingly expanding. Within a nameless mountain, a youth with red lips and white teeth was roasting a mysterious corpse that had been dead for hundreds of millions of years. He took a bite and then spat it out. "Pooh, this old corpse is really unpalatable." This was Old Gu. He had previously revived from underground and was the body of the 9 netherworld. Only after eating the bloodline fruit did he recover and become the body of the exotic wilderness Tao race. Now, he was also pursuing power. He stole some ancient beast corpses and treasures from famous mountains and great rivers to increase his own strength. He couldn't forget his own big brother, Li Su. When Li Su was at the peak of his power, he swept through the 6 directions and 8 desolates. However, he unexpectedly died a violent death. Even now, he didn't know the cause of his death. This was Old Gu's lifelong obsession. He wanted to find out the truth and take revenge for Li Su. Who would have thought that guy would be so good at tormenting people? He actually killed Tai Wu? After Old Gu heard the news, he was a bit dumbstruck and felt horrified. In his opinion, Chu Feng already had such strength at such a young age. He was simply not weaker than his big brother back then. Could it really be my big brother's reincarnation? Bah! This thing is such a scoundrel. How could he be as wise and powerful as my big brother? Old Gu was unconvinced. However, he began to get serious. He wanted to rapidly improve himself and rise in this era where heaven and earth were becoming more and more terrifying and the mysteries of heaven were becoming increasingly vague. "He's actually so powerful. You really are my father." In a certain distant and unknown mountain range, a youth had just come out from robbing an ancient tomb. After hearing the discussions of the evolvers on the road, his expression was rather complicated. His strength was very strong, but at this moment, his face was twitching. After hearing the news about Chu Feng, his expression was rather complicated. He was the little Taoist from back then, the son of Chu Feng and Qin Luoyin. His reincarnation was very successful. After all, he had walked onto the reincarnation path with a complete talisman. Now, after learning that Chu Feng had come into being and that his battle achievements were so shocking, he had a feeling that he was being mocked by that old man. It was as if Chu Feng was telling him that his father was still his father. "I'm not convinced. I'm not convinced. I wanted to guide you in this life. I wanted to guide you and teach you. In the end, I didn't expect you to come into being even earlier than me. Moreover, you're so extraordinary." The little Taoist was extremely indignant. He felt that his previous life was too miserable. He was beaten up by Chu Feng on the reincarnation path and robbed of his talisman. In the end, he even became his son inexplicably. He couldn't even take revenge, even if he had a grudge. He really felt too depressed and too sullen. The little Taoist still wanted to properly teach Chu Feng in this life in the Yang realm and let him know why flowers were so red. In the end, he sadly discovered that if they were to meet again, he might possibly experience another tragedy. Haha, as expected of my brother. Within a certain dark organization, a youth with slicked back hair had 2 coarse ox horns on his head. He had a cigar as thick as a carrot in his mouth, and was puffing out clouds of smoke. He was extremely happy. Suddenly, with a bang, an old ox gave him a hoof and sent him flying out like a scarecrow. The ox berated him. "You're just a fart, puffing out clouds of smoke all day long. Go cultivate." "I'll go." The big black yak's reincarnation, Little Yak, was incomparably gloomy. He mumbled, "This old ox isn't young anymore. Give me some more time. Let us brothers properly cultivate." "No, let us father and son cultivate." In the end, he flew out again before he could even finish changing his words. "Calf brat, you're becoming more and more impudent. Who are you brothers with? Your grandfather. I'll beat you to death." The old ox was enraged. He glared there and gave him a few more hoof. "Don't. Father, you're my biological father. Why are you scolding my grandfather? He's also your biological father. If you hit me again, I'll tell him." "I'm hitting you, calf brat." Then, with a bang, the calf flew into the air. "Ayo moo, it hurts so much." Calf's calf howled. In the Yang realm, outside a certain dangerous land, a silvery bolt of lightning flew past in the sky above the silent and lifeless Scarlet Land. It tore through the void and its speed was really too fast. When it stopped and landed on top of a mountain, people were shocked to discover that it was actually a white Qilin. It wasn't an ordinary Qilin beast, but a true Qilin with ancestral blood. The mountain peak was a forbidden area. There was an altar at the top, and on the altar was a broken ancient eggshell. A creature had hatched from it more than 10 years ago. This was a forbidden area. The egg on the altar had existed for who knew how many years. The eggshell had already become stone and almost fossilized. In the end, it still hatched a creature. This white Qilin had recently been out and traveling nearby. Today, it received news of Chu Feng. Its eyes flickered and were filled with the radiance of wisdom. It said softly, "I taught you the breathing technique. We went through life and death together in the lesser Yin realm. Are we finally going to reunite now?" On this day, not only were the orthodoxies in the Yang realm in heated discussion, but some of Chu Feng's old friends who had awakened the memories of their past lives were also shocked. They were happy and shocked. Chu Feng's ex-girlfriend, Linoi, was originally about to embark on a mysterious path. At this moment, after receiving the news, she was also shocked and revealed a strange expression. She said softly, "You actually reached this step. Your steps are very big and your speed is too fast." In a certain beautiful mountain valley in Cloud Province, white mist billowed and caves were everywhere. The spiritual energy was so dense that it couldn't be dispersed. It was truly a land of immortals. There was a manor in this area. It had the majesty of a palace, but also the novelty of a modern villa. The herbal field in the courtyard was fragrant and colorful. There was even a pavilion in front of it, a waterfall, a wisteria, and a verdant parasol tree. In the pavilion, a pure white hand was throwing food into a black gold birdcage suspended in midair. It was accompanied by an indifferent voice. "Oh, it's a little interesting. The ghost of the lesser Yin realm has become a spirit and killed even Taiwu. He." After this person left, The beautiful purple Luan in the cage let out chirping sounds and was about to cry. However, it couldn't transform now and couldn't make a human sound. It was completely beaten back to its original form, and its large eyes were filled with tears. Chapter 1432. Chi. A beam of light tore through eternity, severing the river of time, piercing through the past, present, and future, traversing through all levels. With the descent of this beam of light, a world bloomed like a flower, burning, and then returning to eternal silence. The entire world was destroyed, eternally evaporating. The creatures of this world all turned into dust in the end. Chu Feng was suddenly shaken, withdrawing from his absent-minded state just now. What did he see? Did the world of the living explode? Was it smashed into powder? What kind of strange scene was this? It really was a bit too terrifying. He found this peaceful mountainous region and wanted to plant the 3 mysterious seeds to evolve himself. He needed a stone jar during this process. It was because it was like this back then. The seeds could only be placed in a stone jar to germinate. However, just now, he hadn't even started planting them. He only stared at the stone jar, exploring its oddities like before. He never expected to see such a scene. The world was pierced through and completely split apart. The universe burned and completely evaporated. What kind of scene was this? Was that the world of the living? It seemed plausible, but it was actually a bit similar. His entire body released a chill. Did he see the past, or did he inadvertently look into the future? This really made one's hair stand on end. He didn't get up and maintained his previous state, immersing his mind into the stone jar again. Not long after, he calmed down and soon saw the abnormal situation again. The heavens rose and fell, one realm after another rising and falling like bubbles. It was like millions and millions of floating dust particles, continuous and unending. It truly was the 10,000 heavens. What was that beam of destructive light that pierced through a world? It was actually a stone jar. It seemed to be fleeing, but also like it was struck out by someone. It came from a distant and unknown place, piercing through a world and destroying a great heaven and earth. Thus, it brought about destruction. Was this the scene of the past? Was this the origin of the stone jar? Chu Feng was shaken. He didn't expect to see such a strange scene today. Where did you come from? How many worlds have you passed through, and how many great worlds have inauspiciousness because of this ending here? Chu Feng said softly. He held the stone jar in his hand, feeling an unprecedented weight. This thing's origins were too great. For an entire day and night, he didn't plant the 3 seeds and instead silently experienced them. He wanted to see the ultimate truth. In the end, he could only shake his head and sigh. This wasn't something he could explore, at least not yet. However, he believed that the Yang realm might be different. At the very least, after the stone jar landed in this world, it was supported, and this world didn't collapse and perish. Or could it be that you are originally from this world? Chu Feng pondered. Whoosh! Suddenly, he heard a slight sound, and then he saw a cold black light interweave. He thought that his eyes were playing tricks on him, but what kind of creature was he? King Heng, how could it be an illusion? The bottom of the stone jar? Chu Feng was astonished. The bottom of the stone jar, which had never moved before, seemed to have threads of black lines extending into the endless depths of the void. How could it be so strange? He had the super eyes of fire and gold. In that instant, he vaguely felt a boundless terror. The ends of these threads seemed to be connected to an endless heaven and earth. These black threads seemed to carry traces of the aura of hell? Is it true that hell is intertwined with the 10,000 realms, extending to the mountainous regions and the vast expanse of worlds? Those places all have the most ancient hell? This kind of hell was definitely not the reincarnation road that he had walked through. It should have been formed countless eras earlier, long before the incalculable epoch. Was it naturally formed, or was it artificially excavated? If it was the former, then the heavens were truly unfathomable and unimaginable. To this day, the so-called ultimate powerhouses had never truly comprehended and understood it. If it was the latter, then it was even more terrifying. Who was it that had such great power to be able to excavate like this, connecting one realm after another, shocking the world and dominating the past? There are still reincarnation hunters in the present world. Perhaps I should start with them, and reveal the shocking truth hidden in the fog from the reincarnation road that I have walked through, Chu Feng said. He felt that when he was powerful enough, the new hell of the present world would be his goal. Perhaps he could find something. However, this was easier said than done. The so-called reincarnation road had existed for who knew how many eras. It was so ancient that it was frightening and so deep that it made people shudder. One had to know that even the enemies of Li Su and the martial madman would choose this road if they were defeated. It was evident that the so-called reincarnation road was of paramount standards. You're really strange. It's hair-raising and chilling. Chu Feng stared at the stone jar in his hand. Why did this thing seem deeper and more unfathomable the more he looked at it? On the side wall of the stone jar, only an extremely small corner of the diagram was revealed. He had previously seen the blurry scenes of supreme creatures from before the age of collapse emperors one after another. He had also obtained several tens to over 100 supreme golden runes from that corner. And now, the bottom of the stone jar had finally revealed a corner of the iceberg. While he was in a trance, there were actually black lines spreading out. It was really strange. Chu Feng was puzzled. Why could he see such a strange phenomenon today? He thought about it. The only accident recently was that when he slaughtered the High Martial Heavenly Lord, the stone jar had smashed into that rice grain-sized broken tile. Was it related to it? That was like the debris of a jar. At that time, I felt that it had a similar aura to the stone jar in my hand. It seemed to be an artifact from the same era. Chu Feng was puzzled. What he had seen just now was caused by the energy transferred over by the debris of the tile, or did the High Martial Heavenly Lord's broken tile awaken some kind of memory in the stone jar? At this time, in a boundless distant land that transcended heaven and earth, a voice rang out from an unknown place. Don't think, I still return. In reality, many strange phenomena had occurred in the Yang realm today, and it wasn't limited to this world. Reincarnation hunters were frequently dispatched because they discovered to their horror that some terrifying cracks had appeared around some areas of the reincarnation road. The ancient road was mended. Some legendary beings who had passed away in meditation long ago, beings who had existed before the martial madman era, had walked out and were rapidly mending the road. Faintly discernible, a voice came from a crack near a certain section of the reincarnation road. I once ruled the world for 10 lifetimes and was called the king for 10 lifetimes. But who am I now, and where am I in the past? This voice was full of desolation, vicissitudes, and inexplicable despair. If Chu Feng was here, he would definitely recognize that it was the valiant young man he had seen outside a certain city in the world of the living before dawn. He was suspected to be a prisoner who had temporarily escaped from the ultimate dark land of reincarnation and was on the loose. There were also void figures that appeared within the crack. They maintained their human forms, appearing in this world. They carried perplexity and disappointment as they roared out, "Who am I? Who suppressed time? Who erased the passage of time? Who imprisoned me? I once fought through the endless cosmos, seeking defeat, yet I couldn't. I am Emperor?" At this moment, the most mysterious soul river, which only peerless experts could understand and hear, rang out a soul-suppressing song. The faint sound pierced through time and traveled to the floating earth of the 4 poles, passing through the celestial emperor burial pit crack. At this moment, a crisp sound came from the martial madman's place of seclusion. A crack appeared on a prehistoric ancient lamp in the forbidden land of seclusion, and the light was instantly extinguished. One must know that the origin of this lamp was astonishing. It had existed for a long time and could predict some terrifying futures related to the martial madman. This immediately woke him up, giving rise to a warning sign in his heart. He silently deduced and drew in a breath of cold air. At this time, all of his disciples and followers in this land of extreme north were alarmed. "Patriarch, what happened?" some disciples asked cautiously and tremblingly in the distance. "My master's master is still alive, and is going to live to this era?" the martial madman muttered to himself. His eyes were like the abyss, occasionally emitting a faint light that was too terrifying to be seen. Then there was an oppressive silence. After a brief moment, the martial madman spoke again in a low voice. "The prophecy of the past has come true. An unprecedented upheaval has begun in this world." At the same time, at the eastern desolate border, the place where Chu Feng lived after breaking out of the reincarnation, the place where he incarnated as Ji Dade, the Ji clan, was also undergoing changes. At the back mountain of the Ji clan, one could see celestial lights soaring into the sky, auspicious vapors rising, and divine rays illuminating the entire desolate mountains and rivers. All of this originated from the temple on the back mountain of the Ji clan. Back then, the place where the fairy of the temple resided was like 100,000 blazing suns. If Chu Feng was here, he would definitely be shocked, because the light that illuminated the world was filled with the rich energy of the reincarnation. A living body was returning from the light, constantly growing stronger. She was the fairy of the temple. When they first met, Chu Feng had sensed her special aura and guessed that she was a reincarnated person and was once a prehistoric powerhouse. This was all that she had awakened after the reincarnation. In the previous life, she had left behind too many backup plans, and now all of her power was rapidly recovering. In reality, this wasn't something that only happened now. Previously, even Chu Feng had heard that there was an unfathomable powerhouse awakening in the desolate border. The kingdom of heaven on earth she left behind was reviving, about to completely return. And now this kind of evolution had reached its peak. The energy of the fairy of the temple at her peak was gathering and surging. One could see a great temple condensing in the kingdom of heaven, golden and resplendent to the extreme. The figure sitting at the center was extremely powerful. It wasn't only the fairy of the temple, even the old woman at her side was rising. There was even someone familiar to Chu Feng, Dong Qing, that woman with a bucket waist, a bloody mouth, long chest hair, and a birthmark on her face. She had once taught Chu Feng the Shaolin fist. Right now, Dong Qing was also rapidly becoming stronger. In the Yang realm, many people sensed it. For example, the old monsters sleeping in the famous mountains and great rivers were all roused. Even on the first mountain, Number 9 suddenly raised his head and stared at the desolate border. In the extreme north, the martial madman sensed it even more. His eyes burst out with divine radiance as he muttered to himself, "Li Su died, a legend among legends, she has reappeared." In the desolate border, a voice transmitted from the temple that was becoming more and more majestic. It was as if it came from the 33 heavens, grand and divine. It was as if time had illuminated the world, and the rhythm of the great Tao baptized the entire desolate east. "The upheaval has begun in this era. Dong Qing, gather the remaining troops in the Yang realm and consolidate my kingdom of heaven." Dong Qing suddenly raised her head after hearing this. She looked at the ancient temple in the kingdom of heaven and said, "I solemnly obey the supreme decree." In the Yang realm, all kinds of changes were taking place. Everything was different. Meanwhile, Chu Feng didn't care about this. He was going to start planting those 3 mysterious seeds and prepare to evolve. Chapter 1433. It's a bit troublesome. Chu Feng weighed the stone jar with some hesitation. If he wanted to plant the 3 seeds, he would need to use the stone jar. However, there was something sealed in the jar, and any carelessness would lead to an unforeseen event. "It's fine, I can still suppress you," He firmly opened the stone jar. The moment the fist-sized jar was opened, the entire mountainous region was immediately dyed in the color of blood. It was as if it had fallen into the depths of hell, bone-piercing cold, ghostly wails, and flying sand and stones. All the inauspicious scenes that could be imagined in the world appeared. A black rain of blood rose from the ground, accompanied by a yellow whirlwind accompanied by scarlet lightning. The terrifying whining sound pierced into one's soul. A terrifying humanoid creature pounced toward Chu Feng. This was the strange and inauspicious effect caused by the strands of DU-level pollen he had accidentally come into contact with in the supreme forbidden area. At that time, he had cut it off and sealed it in the stone jar. Now, around this strange humanoid, there were countless spatial cracks several feet wide, spreading in all directions like a big explosion. At this moment, even the order of heaven and earth was trembling, and the mountains, rivers, and earth were trembling. Such an inauspicious thing was awe-inspiring, terrifying, and truly terrifying. It was indescribable and constantly changing from a humanoid to another species. This was an inevitable and difficult tribulation to overcome when undergoing the DU-level transformation. Suppress. Chu Feng lightly shouted and pressed down a long bronze tool. With the help of the stone jar's lid, they worked together to imprison it in the void. The bronze tool also originated from the secret realm of the supreme forbidden area. It had fallen from a bronze coffin during a great battle countless years ago, and it had an indescribable demon-suppressing ability. Although there were ghostly wails and various abnormal scenes of demons crying tears of blood, that indescribable thing was finally unable to move. Did it contaminate my reincarnation soil? Chu Feng looked at the stone jar. There were many rare materials inside, and he was truly afraid that the strange thing would corrode some of the treasures. Fortunately, everything was fine. That terrifying and strange thing only targeted living things. Chu Feng's preparations were quite complete. This time, after looting the extreme martial dojo, he had brought a large amount of precious soil, all of which were quite high-grade and gorgeous medicinal soil. All kinds of soil were glowing. They didn't look like the so-called soil for planting plants at all. Instead, they looked more like piles and piles of small, sparkling, and translucent treasures. Some of the mounds shone with a myriad of colors, some were like rainbows blooming with 7 kinds of lights, and some were like golden suns burning with dazzling energy radiance. Not to mention anything else, just the quality of this soil was enough to make people feel as if they were bathing in a spring breeze, causing all the pores on Chu Feng's body to open up. That was because the rich energy essence was automatically drilling into his body. "Don't let me down," Chu Feng muttered to himself. He had been in the small netherworld for so long, and he had collected all the strange soil in the starry sky, but only one of the seeds had taken root and germinated. The other 2 seeds had never changed. Now, he was quite looking forward to the other 2 seeds. Perhaps they could germinate and bear fruit after being nourished by the precious soil in the Yang realm. He carefully took out the 3 seed. One of them, needless to say, had germinated many times and sprinkled the most mysterious pollen, creating Chu Feng. As for the other 2 seeds, they were still the size of a fingernail, just like in the past. One was jet black and very shriveled, as if it had been deformed and seriously lacked vitality. The other was purplish-brown and flat, as if it had been squashed by an irresistible external force. Now, Chu Feng had become the Heng King. He held the 3 seeds in his hand and tried to pinch them with force, but the result was that they didn't move at all. They couldn't be damaged at all. In fact, this was expected. One had to know that when the 3 seeds walked the path of reincarnation with him, rushing from the end of the netherworld to the Yang realm, Chu Feng's own body was protected by the stone jar and collapsed. If it weren't for the various medicinal herbs at the end of the netherworld, such as the 33-layer heaven's grass, and the like to nourish him, he would have died long ago. It was impossible for his flesh and blood to be reconstructed. Meanwhile, the three seeds had experienced all kinds of tribulations on the path of the netherworld. Even without the power of reincarnation, they could not be damaged in the slightest. This was even more terrifying because even the power of reincarnation couldn't erase them. Chu Feng placed the auspicious soil into the stone jar. Now its capacity was very large. After all, after several transformations, the inside of the stone jar had a diameter of 10 meters. For a moment, the jar was overflowing with colorful lights. Dense mist rose, and the energy essence was astonishingly rich. It was like a narrow, immortal kingdom. He started from the lowest grade of soil. That was because Chu Feng had some kind of ambition. He hoped that the three seeds would be able to start all over again in the Yang realm. He hoped that they would blossom and bear fruit at the most primitive stage, awakening the conscious, shackled, and carefree levels. Unfortunately, he was disappointed. Not only were there no movements from the two seeds that had never germinated, but there were also no changes to the seeds that had already blossomed more than once. He couldn't help but frown. It seemed like he was thinking too much. He still needed a higher grade of soil. Without any hesitation, he began to put in the 5-colored soil and the sparkling soil that emitted a 7-colored radiance. In reality, the so-called low-grade soil was only relative. After all, it originated from the great martial deity's ritual ground, so how could it be ordinary? But it was only relative. Now that it had changed to a high-grade soil, the spiritual energy was flourishing. Rays of brilliance were like a horned dragon soaring into the sky or a fire phoenix spreading its wings. It was extremely dazzling, and a vast and divine aura spread out. After careful observation, there was indeed movement from the seeds. One of them was emitting a vigorous and rich vitality and was slowly germinating in the soil. This made Chu Feng feel both happy and regretful at the same time. The other two seeds were still lifeless and showed no signs of recovery. Even the environment of the Yang realm can't do it? Don't tell me I have to go to the heavens or even higher regions. Or is the grade of the soil now not high enough? Chu Feng guessed. Could it be that this was a very special variant? It corresponded to an unimaginable level and would have a special effect once it bloomed? Don't tell me it'll grow into a fairy in the future? Or will it grow into a mysterious lady of the 9 heavens or a supreme empress? Chu Feng's smile was clearly asking for a beating. After so many years, the most vigorous seed had recovered once again. In any case, this was something to be happy about. It was just that the growth of the seed was somewhat slow. It wasn't as rapid as in the past. He observed for a moment and then put in the high-grade golden soil into the stone jar. For a moment, divine light rushed into the sky like a blazing sun. The vitality rose and fell like the ocean as it expanded continuously. Were it not for Chu Feng's domain concealment, it would have alarmed all the life forms in the mountain range. Sure enough, the speed at which the seed took root and germinated was a bit faster. It gradually broke through the soil, and a smear of golden light accompanied by black light and also dyed with green multicolored light blended together and evolved. In the end, it became a small tree that grew out of the pot. An astonishing vitality was being nurtured. A terrifying tide of spiritual energy surged and surged. It was extremely astonishing and was actually accompanied by the interweaving of laws. Good! Chu Feng was overjoyed. However, the growth rate of this sapling was still not fast enough for the little netherworld. He could only wait patiently. It seems it's impossible to start from the beginning again. It should start from the Illuminator or God realm, guessed Chu Feng. Then, while waiting, he decisively took out a pile of fruits and some plants that were blossoming with sparkling flower bud. He began to eat and absorb them. These were the spoils of war he had plundered from the extreme martial training grounds. Originally, a large number of evolvers had gathered there because of the immortal ledge sacred fruit gathering. The things they carried were all rare treasures. The Black Blood Research Institute, one of the four most authoritative evolutionary research organizations in the Yang realm, had once published a special article on the strongest fruits of each realm. It also discussed the mutant fruits eaten by famous historical figures such as Li Su and the martial madman. Those mutant fruits had now become synonyms for the strongest fruits and pollen. It was as if they had become the standard. This time, the exchange held at the martial madman's training grounds definitely did not lack such fruit. Moreover, there were many of them planted in the Extreme Martial Training Institute's medicinal fields. Among them, the wisdom fruit of the Abu Jinbo ancient temple was world famous. Some of the peerless powerhouses with great achievements in history had eaten it, which made it extremely famous. Even Chu Feng had thought of taking the risk to explore the legendary ancient land, the Abu Jinbo ancient temple. There was such a fruit in front of him. It hung on a small tree that was half the height of a person. It was filled with purple gas, and its fragrance was so strong that it could not be dispersed. Chu Feng had plundered the entire medicinal field of the Extreme Martial Training Institute. Naturally, there was more than one kind of sacred fruit. There was also the blood yuan fruit that was known to be the best for melting the shackles of the human body, the demon refining fruit from the prehistoric demon imperial palace, and the mysterious immortal herb from the Taoist ruins of the Longevity Temple. Its flower buds were hanging and filled with fragrance. These were the immortal ledge sacred fruits that the authoritative Black Blood Research Institute highly recommended. The whole world knew about them, and evolvers of all classes were envious. Chu Feng counted them carefully, and his heart trembled. Then, he felt a huge sense of harvest and joy. These so-called strongest pollen and fruits, from the awakened to the illuminator level, were all included. However, it was a pity that they lacked those above the god level. However, it was understandable after thinking about it carefully. The higher the level of the strongest pollen and fruits, the scarier and more difficult it was to find them. After all, the main purpose of the exchange meeting this time was to serve the young geniuses. Naturally, it was mainly for those below the god level. I have 3 seeds. That's enough. Chu Feng was very confident about this. However, since he had obtained these immortal ledge sacred fruits, he naturally wouldn't waste them. He actively adjusted his own state and no longer had the aura of King Heng. He displayed the Yang Realm Golden Body level Dao fruit. Back then, after coming to the Yang Realm, he chose a difficult and bitter path of cultivation based on the information he had learned. He didn't use pollen or fruits in the early stages and only relied on himself to break through. If he could break through the barrier by himself and break through to the Saint Domain, then compress it to the golden body level, his physical body would be unimaginable. It would be as if he had been tempered 1,000 times, and it would be like a real Buddha walking in the human world. After all these years, his efforts had paid off. He had walked through this difficult path. Now, his physical body was firm and tough. It could be said that he was walking in the human world with the body of a Buddha. He relied on himself to break through the insurmountable chasm and build the strongest foundation. After enduring for so many years, he could finally use pollen. He plucked a purple fruit and took a bite. Immediately, purple gas emitted from his 7 apertures and his whole body was filled with fragrance. Rich energy poured into his body. Although he was already strong enough, it would be even more unimaginable if the little netherworld's Heng King Dao fruit was taken into account. But now, this kind of fruit was still effective for him, because after he circulated the breathing technique, it wasn't just his physical body that was being nourished. There was also the corresponding soul light and spiritual energy of the Yang Realm Dao fruit. As the small gray millstone rotated in his body, he removed all harmful substances and didn't leave a trace of future trouble. The essence was all rapidly absorbed. "It's delicious!" Chu Feng exclaimed in admiration. He looked like he was enjoying it very much. He felt warm all over and his spirit was about to leave his body. Very soon, he took another bite of the blood origin fruit. Scarlet clouds lingered around him, as if he was in a fairyland. "It's wonderful!" Chu Feng was light as a feather, as if he was drunk. The Yang Realm Tao fruit was being nourished, and his body became more and more sacred. Divine chains of order appeared in his pores. Not long after, he ate all the fruits and absorbed all the pollen. Clouds were steaming around his body, and the atmosphere was astonishing. It was as if a heavenly country had formed around him. This kind of evolution was extremely rapid. His Yang Realm Tao fruit rose to the mirror level in one go and was about to enter the God level. He had already experienced the scenery of the Heng King domain. This kind of upheaval was nothing to him. He could calmly bear it. The Yang Realm Tao fruit was no longer deliberately suppressed today. He began to rise unscrupulously and wanted to be on equal footing with the little netherworld's Heng King Tao fruit. In reality, once they were both Heng King Tao fruits, there would be more opportunities to choose. When the time came, when the two kings merged and yin and yang collided, what would happen? Everyone knew that it was extremely difficult to become a celestial venerable. One needed to use time to grind, nurture, and refine it. It was as difficult as a mortal ascending to heaven. However, Chu Feng had some confidence. If it was under the impact of the Heng King Tao fruit of yin and yang, he might be able to break through the barrier of the Great Path without the accumulation of time. Of course, if the three seeds bloomed and bore fruit many times this time, he might not even need to use these methods, and he would be able to advance rapidly. After all, the three seeds were too extraordinary. Apart from the higher grade soil that he used just now, he still had a backup plan. It was a mutant soil that was slightly stronger than the golden soil, celestial venerable level soil. In addition, this time, Chu Feng also collected the rare treasure that the Taiwu used to cultivate the mystical lotus, almighty level soil. The growth is too slow. It seems like I have to throw all the golden soil in. As expected, as Chu Feng put all the golden soil into the stone jar, the growth speed of the small tree increased continuously. In the blink of an eye, it became a golden trunk that was 6 feet tall. The black leaves swayed and black light sprinkled down. The strange phenomenon was astonishing, and there were traces of green clouds that spread like ripples. In a split second, a strange sound was heard. It was like celestial music from the 9 heavens, but also like the sound of all the living beings in the heavens worshipping together. There was also the sound of Tao singing. Drastic changes began. The tree grew rapidly and was about to enter the mature stage. Flower buds could vaguely be seen gradually appearing. Chapter 1434. The 6-zhang tree trunk was golden and bold. It was covered in palm-sized old bark that looked like scales after splitting apart. Even though it had just been born and had only grown for a short period of time, it gave off a feeling of the vicissitudes of time. This was just too astonishing. When one looked at the trunk, it was as if they were facing a piece of history that couldn't be investigated. It was full of the accumulation of time, as if it had experienced the rise and fall of many great eras. Chu Feng felt that this was caused by the aura contained within the seed itself. It was unknown just how many great eras it had existed for, but it still hadn't been erased. The leaves on the tree swayed and dark light scattered down. It was as if dark stars suddenly released beams of light and fell from the cosmos, giving this place an indescribably powerful aura. At the same time, wisps of green multicolored light interweaved in the surroundings of this bold tree. It was accompanied by Tao sounds and sacrificial sounds that resounded through the mountains. In a daze, it was as if eras appeared one after another on a grand scale. The cosmos was resplendent and heavenly geniuses contended for supremacy, but in the end they were all bleak and blood-stained, heading towards the bleak end of decline. Those were tragic and bleak scenes. Even the ending was blurry and dim, unable to be completely recorded down. At the top of the tree, the branches were flourishing. Golden brilliance flickered about, and a gorgeous rain of light continuously descended. It was a divine expanse. dense immortal mist swirled about, as if an emperor flower was about to bloom. The flower bud grew at the very top of the branches. It continuously grew, gradually becoming larger and fuller. It was already 10 centimeters long, and wisps of fragrance faintly discernible wafted out. In that instant everything returned to silence. As soon as this fragrance appeared, the entire mountain and river became completely peaceful. Many order symbols interweaved on the mountain. The shocking irregular scene was accompanied by a bone-penetrating fragrance, making Chu Feng's entire body calm down. His mind was at peace, and all of the murderous aura disappeared. He was like a saint, like a Buddha, like a great sage. At this moment, he felt as if he was pure like a crystal, bright like the bright moon, and brilliant like the rosy clouds of dawn. His entire body and mind were being refined, holy and otherworldly. It was to the extent where it gave others the misconception that he was even purer than a heavenly fairy. In a daze, he felt as if he was ascending to become an immortal. In that instant, a rain of light poured down from the sky, covering Chu Feng. His body was sparkling and brilliant, bathing within. That flower bud was blooming, wisps of white mist surging, scattering towards him. Just like in the past, when the pollen fell, not a single bit was wasted, like a trickle, all of it flowing towards him. Chu Feng's heart was as tranquil as an ancient well, without any waves or ripples. He circulated the robbery induction breathing technique and swallowed the special white mist. The pollen was like smoke and sunset, exquisite and sparkling. At first, it entered his body through his nose and mouth. Then, the white mist enveloped his entire body and entered every inch of his muscles, entering all the cells in his body. At the top of the tree, the blooming flower buds were as big as a bowl and were divided into 3 layers. There were 9 green petals on the outermost layer of the flower. Green multicolored light surged around it, nurturing a strong aura of life. There were 6 golden petals in the middle, and they were all emitting a blinding light that was extremely intense. There were 3 petals in the innermost layer that shone with a black light like water. They were like the starlight flowing in the deep night sky, and their fragrance assailed the nostrils. The pollen was at the very center, spreading out unceasingly. The fine granules were sparkling and sparkling, as though millions of tiny stars were pouring out in torrents. They fluttered in the air, transforming into mist and light particles. The fragrance was really special. It gradually thickened from a light fragrance, and almost made people intoxicated. They didn't know where they were, and their entire bodies were bathed in it, realizing a transition in the level of life. This kind of transformation was extremely swift and violent. Even Chu Feng could hear the sound of his joints moving and crackling. His blood flowed faster, and his heart was beating like a big drum. It shook the entire mountain region, causing it to tremble and rumble incessantly. Such a powerful heartbeat was really somewhat frightening. If an ordinary creature were here, it would cause their own heart to explode. At this moment, even many boulders on the ground were sent flying. At this moment, Chu Feng circulated the robbery induction breathing technique. Not only his flesh and blood, but even his 5 viscera and 6 bowels were breathing. His heart was flourishing like a red sun, and when his lungs breathed, there was sword chi surging inside. After that, his soul light also did the same. He breathed in and out, guiding the pollen into his body. The robbery induction breathing technique wasn't just the breathing of the corporeal body, even the spirit was the same. And after this seed grew into a big tree and blossomed, its pollen could actually take effect on the soul light too. Those sparkling and translucent pollen directly entered the soul, which was truly shocking. From his flesh and blood to his viscera, then to his bones, marrow, and soul light, Chu Feng's entire body, including his hair, was translucent and translucent. It was even more resplendent than the morning glow, incomparably divine, and his entire body was wrapped in immortal mist. Very soon, he began to transform. His flesh and blood were minutely adjusted, and there would occasionally be partial remodeling. His flesh and blood were already the Hung King physique, but he could actually still have minute adjustments. It could be seen how abnormal the pollen was. It transcended the world. The biggest change was the Yang Realm Tao fruit. Chu Feng's Yang Realm soul light was resplendent like a huge sun across the sky. It illuminated every part of his body and nourished all of his cells. This was a kind of bizarre transformation. His flesh and spirit resonated, interacted, and boosted each other, allowing him to practically step into the God-level domain in an instant. Chu Feng's Yang Realm Tao fruit became stronger, growing to the God level, and then to the divine general level. This was truly a kind of rapid leap and astonishing growth. But to Chu Feng this was nothing. After all, the little netherworld's Tao fruit had already reached the Hung King physique level, so he could completely endure it. It wouldn't be a problem for him to leap even further. The entire sky was filled with pollen, and there were flowing lights everywhere. They were as pure and holy as the bright moon and as brilliant as the sea of stars. They covered the surface of Chu Feng's body, resonating with the soul light and resonating with order. At this moment, divine chains of order twined around him one after another, surrounding him in the center. It was as though an immortal king had come back to life, and he was suspected to be the reincarnation of a Tao ancestor. The scene was exceptionally astonishing. Not long after, all the light particles were absorbed by Chu Feng, and the dazzling flower petals that were the size of large bowls withered in an instant. Everything happened too quickly. Following that, the entire tree began to wither, as though it had experienced a fire calamity. The lusterless leaves were like butterflies dancing in late autumn, losing their essence, energy, and spirit. Life had reached its end. The entire tree withered, and then it collapsed. As the mountain wind blew, the main trunk of the Zhang's 6 golden body turned into ashes, and the leaves also turned into fine powder. As for the top of the tree, the moment the petals withered, a seed fell down and landed on the ground. It collided with the mountain rocks and actually emitted a metallic sound. Chu Feng stood in the mountainous region, and the purple bamboo forest rustled in the distance. The glowing hair on his head danced in the wind, and there was a brilliant smile on his delicate face. The evolution this time allowed him to experience many things. The future path of evolution would illuminate the heavens, and it was worth looking forward to. On the surface, he looked like a harmless youth, full of youthful vigor, but how many people could see through him at first sight? Was he a Hing King? He had even killed a powerful celestial venerable. Chu Feng had been waiting for this day all along. He could once again absorb pollen as he strode forward. The great world of today was destined to change. From all the signs and the reactions of the various powerhouses, perhaps it would soon be earth-shattering and shake the foundations of this world. Now, rising up and becoming stronger was an urgent matter. Chu Feng hoped to compete in this great era, with 100 barges vying and 1,000 sails racing to reach the supreme shore. What did it grow this time? Chu Feng walked over to the pile of ashes, searching for the seeds that had fallen to the ground. It can't be another divine weapon, right? When will it transform into a celestial fairy? He mumbled. After all, he had experience, so he didn't care too much. However, when he picked up the seed from the ashes, he was still dumbfounded and couldn't speak for a long time. Only when the breeze blew past did Chu Feng say, "You hammer, you grew this thing?" He pinched the seed, looked at it, and said, "It really is a hammer." The seed turned into a small hammer that had a dark gold luster. It was about 2 inches long and was much bigger than the previous seeds. However, this thing could only be used with 2 fingers. It was too difficult to hold it in one's hand and smash it with one's hand. Chu Feng was quite speechless. This thing was becoming more and more strange. Whether it was a sword or a bell, they were both more beautiful than a hammer, but now it had turned into a dark gold hammer. He didn't even need to test it to know that it was definitely extremely hard and could be used as a weapon. At this time, Chu Feng turned back and looked at a distant mountain peak. "It's been so long, have you seen enough?" He had long sensed that there were living beings there, but he didn't care because it was just a divine being spying on him. To him, it was as weak as a scarecrow. It was just that this interrupted his evolution process, which made him somewhat dissatisfied. Moreover, this person was a bit hostile. Swoosh! Chu Feng shook his hand and flung the hammer out. The sky rumbled with a boom, and the mountain peak collapsed immediately and turned into dust. A black pangolin appeared. It was originally hiding in the belly of the mountain and was now in a sorry state. At the same time, it was incomparably terrified. What kind of hammer was this? It hadn't even touched the mountain, but its aura had already torn the mountain apart. Not long ago, it had clearly seen that it was formed from a seed. It had fallen from a strange golden tree 6 meters tall. It was simply too terrifying. It felt a wave of lingering fear. If the hammer had fallen directly, it would have turned into a pool of blood on the spot. This made its hair stand on end. It had come from the dark world and was an innate divine hunter. It was a creature that dared to spy on high-level evolved beings and search for their traces. However, it had only appeared today and was only in charge of searching. Yet, it was immediately discovered by someone. This made it tremble. Fortunately, it was well prepared. There was a ready-made teleportation domain divine platform beneath its feet. With a swoosh, it disappeared from its original position. However, Chu Feng's speed exceeded its imagination. The stone jar, bronze tool, and seed were quickly collected and disappeared into the teleportation domain in the blink of an eye. The mountains returned to peace amidst the whistling gales. However, millions and millions of kilometers away, an astonishing change had taken place over a dozen or so prefectures. In a swamp, black fog billowed. An Empyrean-level old pangolin, half man, half beast, was sitting in meditation. Suddenly, its eyes flashed open and a bolt of lightning seemed to cut through the void in the darkness. "Old ancestor, I've found traces of Chu Feng. Ah, he's following us." Only now did the divine-level pangolin realize that behind him, almost sticking to his neck, was a young man who looked very bright and radiant. Chu Feng immediately sensed that it was a dense darkness aura. The old pangolin in front of him came from the dark underground powers and was a natural killer. Without a doubt, this was the result of the bounty issued by the Taiwu's master. The dark underground creatures swarmed out of their lair. This was an old killer. Indeed, this old killer had lived to this day and was extremely experienced. He had stepped over mountains of corpses and seas of blood. He had entered the Tao through slaughter and had even evolved to the Empyrean level. He had dispatched a large number of his disciples and descendants, but he had never expected that he would discover traces of Chu Feng as soon as he accepted the mission. In fact, it was unknown how many veteran hunters like him had been mobilized. A huge dark storm was brewing. With a swoosh, the old pangolin disappeared immediately. This kind of creature could pierce through mountains and the earth. At this stage of cultivation, it could even penetrate the void. It was impossible to guard against it. It was one of the most difficult Empyrean-level assassins to deal with. Now, it had disappeared before Chu Feng's eyes. It had disappeared. Boom! Amidst the surging black mist, a large black claw suddenly appeared above Chu Feng's head and was almost touching his scalp. The stench of blood assailed his nostrils. This was a thick evil aura accumulated from killing tens of thousands of living beings. Without a sound, Chu Feng moved sideways, easily avoiding it. At the same time, the old pangolin disappeared, hiding in the void. He believed that, as an Empyrean assassin, he should be able to kill Chu Feng. However, he immediately regretted it. The moment he saw Chu Feng open his eyes, his entire body exuded a cold chill. This was his nemesis. The other party had actually cultivated the fiery eyes and could see through all fabrications. Chu Feng held the little hammer in 2 fingers and smashed it towards a certain part of the void. The old pangolin couldn't hide from him. He could see through it with a single glance. Bang! The little hammer contained tremendous strength. Moreover, it was accompanied by tens of thousands of divine chains of order. It was as if world-destroying thunder was descending. That part of the void exploded. Even though the old pangolin's movements were as fast as lightning, he still couldn't completely avoid it. He was inferior to Chu Feng, and a large chunk of his body broke off. His entire body was covered in blood. An Empyrean assassin from the darkness underground wants to kill me? Chu Feng kicked out. Great Tao fluctuations surged. The space in front of him collapsed and exploded. The old pangolin cried out, "This grandpa's goods!" He felt great regret. He shouldn't have accepted this mission and was even more angry. That divine-level descendant of his had attracted a killing star so quickly. He hadn't even finished his preparations yet. He avoided this kick, but his body seemed to have sunk into a swamp. It was difficult for him to struggle free as he was imprisoned in midair. This was because Chu Feng's human king domain had opened. Rumble! That little hammer flew over once more, smashing into the old pangolin's body and immediately causing him to explode. An Empyrean assassin was exterminated in the blink of an eye. A rain of blood filled the skies. You're just an early Empyrean. You walk in the darkness and are an experienced assassin, yet you dare to kill me? You're far from it. Chu Feng sneered. He himself had walked out of a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood, so he wasn't afraid of being hunted. However, he also became serious. The martial madman was one of the most terrifying sources of darkness. After his disciple had issued a bounty, an Empyrean assassin had immediately taken action. One could see how terrifying his influence was. Ah! That divine-level pangolin was terrified and cried out. His old ancestor had actually died. Chu Feng cast a sidelong glance at it. Two beams of light shot out from his fiery eyes and instantly pierced through its skull, killing it instantly. It was covered in blood as it collapsed into the swamp. This place isn't bad. It's very quiet. I can continue to evolve and plant my hammer. Not long after, Chu Feng placed the hammer into the stone jar. He also placed a large pile of Empyrean-grade soil that was shining with divine light into the sky. It was too dazzling, and the spiritual energy was so dense that it formed ripples. It constantly expanded, making the entire swamp seem holy. This time, it wasn't a tree or a vine. The hammer-shaped seed actually grew a stalk of grass. However, it wasn't very short, and it was even taller than Chu Feng. The leaves were shaped like orchids, flowing with light, but they were silvery white in color and translucent. Very quickly, it began to bloom. The petals were bright red and glaring. It was like hundreds of red suns had leapt out of a calm sea, dyeing the world red. Brilliant rays of light shone in all directions. The vast ocean and even the universe seemed to be drowned in the red glow. At the same time, Chu Feng let out a strange cry. The sky is filled with heavenly fairies? The moment the flower bud bloomed, he saw beautiful heavenly fairies appear in midair one after another. Then, they fell down like dumplings. He was simply intoxicated. Chu Feng was completely speechless. The old nagging had actually made his vision come true? Today, he actually grew heavenly fairies. Sogu. Chapter 1435. Unexpectedly, there really was a heavenly fairy, graceful and beautiful, otherworldly, untainted by the world of mortals. With a holy light, their white clothes fluttered as they flew through the air. Chu Feng was flabbergasted. He was truly stunned. However, he reacted quickly and immediately said, "Come on, come at me. If I dodge, then I really have kidney deficiency." Only he could say such shameless words. His face was not red and his heart was not beating fast. Moreover, with a very passionate look, he enthusiastically reached out to receive them. Not just one, but a group of white-clothed beauties descended from the void, accompanied by a fragrant scent. Some of the female immortals had black hair like a waterfall, skin like cream, and beautiful eyes with spiritual brilliance. They were really stunning. Some of the fairies were still slightly immature, no more than 16 years old, with a little baby fat. It could be said that their faces were full of collagen, and their big eyes flickered with cunning. Although some of the fairies were elegant, their big eyes showed another kind of temperament. They were actually amorous, as if they had fallen into the world of mortals. There was also a female immortal with golden hair, but she had an oriental face. Even her whole body was exuding the golden brilliance of the morning glow, as if shrouded in layers of divine halos, incomparably sacred. A group of female immortals, each with different postures, could all be called peerless beauties. Now that they were gathered in the same era, national beauty was not enough to describe them. They could make a king abandon his country and be intoxicated by them. Who's afraid of who? I, Chu Feng, have never been weaker than anyone in my life. Come at me. Chu Feng patted his chest. It could be said that his momentum was magnificent, and his momentum was quite strong. He had already gone to face the void. If this kind of words were heard by the old scholar from the outside world, he would definitely scold him, condemn him by word and pen, and then throw him into a bottomless abyss. Light laughter came, bewitching people's hearts. Especially when this kind of laughter was linked together, when the group of fairies' clothes fluttered and fell together, the scene was even more beautiful and suffocating. Silk-like hair, beautiful and flawless faces, starry eyes, swan-like necks, sparkling and translucent arms, slender and exquisite figures. This was the living immortal chart. Chu Feng soared into the air and stood in the middle of the immortal register. The fragrance assailed the nostrils, and the immortal-like light rain filled the sky, making people suspect that they were in a dream. It had to be said that these heavenly fairies were quite daring. They actually took the initiative to fly towards Chu Feng, all of them throwing themselves at him. Come, come, I, Chu Wudi, have never been afraid of anyone, he shouted. All of a sudden, Chu Feng let out a long sigh and his face fell. He floated in the air, feeling frustrated and dissatisfied. The so-called white-clothed female immortal was like an illusory flower, passing through his arm like the brilliant morning glow sprinkling on his body. I knew it wouldn't be that easy. He naturally had a premonition that there was no way he could plant a group of flesh and blood heavenly fairies. That was extremely unrealistic. After all, it was just a seed. Of course, if a single heavenly fairy was planted, then there might still be a chance, but no matter how one looked at it, it seemed too excessive, too unrealistic. However, this time, the sky was full of white-clothed fairies. It was as if they were riding the waves, and even his super-fiery eyes couldn't distinguish them clearly. It was indeed astonishing. All the fairies were surrounded by the light of order, and they were all transformed from sparkling pollen particles. They entered Chu Feng's flesh and blood body, turning into special energy that was injected into all his cells. Boom! On the orchid-like silver plant, after the flower bud bloomed, it didn't wither quickly. Instead, a fruit grew from the brilliant red petals. The fragrance assailed his nostrils, and the fragrance was too tempting. At the same time, the fruit had fragments of rules that were faintly discernible, which was quite astonishing. Chu Feng was deeply amazed. This was something that had never happened before. In the past, once it bloomed, the whole plant would quickly wither, leaving only a seed. But now it actually grew a fresh red fruit? Chu Feng absorbed the pollen, and his own body was once again fine-tuned. Meanwhile, the soul light conceived by the Yang Realm Dao fruit was growing. While crossing the city, he was observing that fruit all along. It wasn't very big, with a diameter of 12 centimeters. It was perfectly round like a red pill, sparkling and translucent, and it emitted light beams. Order and rules appeared in the fruit, and it was very extraordinary. However, as time went by, he had already absorbed most of the pollen, but that fruit didn't change much. In fact, it was a little dim. Oh no, what's going on? Chu Feng reacted quickly. He glanced at the inside of the stone jar and immediately realized why. There wasn't enough celestial venerable earth. This time, it actually bloomed and bore fruit, and the amount of celestial venerable earth required was huge, far exceeding his expectations. Fortunately, he had obtained a large amount of celestial venerable earth from looting the extreme martial dojo this time. After all, he was a celestial venerable of the martial madman's lineage, and his net worth was excessively high. Chu Feng quickly added brilliant soil into the jar. He even added a small portion of the mutant soil used to nurture the almighty crimson lotus. All of this was because he was worried that an accident would occur this time. Fortunately, with the addition of rare and precious soil, this silver orchid-like plant stabilized and once again blossomed with lightning-like light beams. And that scarlet fruit was even more sparkling and translucent than red coral and even more resplendent than a blood diamond illuminated by sunlight. Scarlet multicolored light shot out one after another, and it was extremely sacred. In the end, the fruit automatically fell off and smashed toward the ground. And at the same time, the silver orchid-like plant withered and turned into fine powder in a split second. It collapsed on its own and fell down in a swirl. My group of celestial fairies really makes my heart ache. Chu Feng stretched out his hand, and all the celestial fairies naturally disappeared. They turned into light particles and were absorbed cleanly by him. While speaking, he moved very quickly. He didn't wait for the fruit to fall to the ground before he grabbed it. The rich fragrance made his soul light float up, and it was actually about to leave his body. Without any hesitation, he took a gulp, and his mouth was immediately filled with the glowing scarlet juice. It was too delicious, sweet, and not greasy. This was a fruit that was more astonishing than any kind of great medicine. The flesh of the fruit melted as soon as it entered his mouth and turned into a resplendent liquid. It then turned into scarlet multicolored light and entered the cells of his entire body. It also nourished his soul light. The Heng King Dao fruit is done, Chu Feng exclaimed in surprise. After a few bites, he ate more than half of the fruit. His entire body was comfortably warm, and his soul light was transforming. He charged all the way into the Divine King realm, broke through to the Great Divine King realm, and finally reached the Heng King realm. This made people apprehensive. It was just a fruit, yet its medicinal effects were so universally shocking. The medicinal effects were enough to stun the old antiques of every sect. It could be confirmed that if it wasn't for Chu Feng's little netherworld Dao fruit achieving the Heng King body long ago and becoming a reference, then he might have directly advanced into the celestial venerable realm because of this fruit. Of course, that wasn't what he hoped for. Instead, he wanted to reach the Heng King realm and attain perfection and be flawless. Only then would he be powerful enough to advance into the celestial venerable realm. How could ordinary celestial venerables enter his eyes? He could kill celestial venerables now. Tai Wu and the hunter Old Pangolin that walked in the darkness were both killed by him when he was at the Heng King Dao fruit level. And now, he already had 2 Heng King Dao fruits. After a few mouthfuls, the remaining bright red fruit that was like the sun was eaten clean by Chu Feng. Divine light was released from his body, and red light filled the sky. It was extremely dazzling. For a moment, his Yang realm Dao fruit evolved to its current limit, the peak of the Heng King realm. He was completely on equal footing with the little netherworld Dao fruit. His body was ethereal and free of dust and dirt, reaching a realm that couldn't be reached anymore. He had reached the end of the king path. If he went any further, he would be a celestial venerable. Who in the world could be a match for him in this realm? Chu Feng really wanted to find such a person to test his own Dao fruit. However, he knew that it would probably be very difficult. It would be difficult to find a few in the Heng King realm even if they searched the entire ancient times. Now, he could only find a creature that could be a match for him among the old fellows. If he made a move against someone of his so-called same generation, it would really be considered bullying. However, no one could say for sure how vast the heavens were, and no one knew how many great realms existed. There would always be accidents, and there would always be all kinds of variables appearing. Especially in this great era, the foundation of the entire Yang realm might be shaken. All kinds of unworldly inheritances and existences from prehistoric myths might appear again. In reality, the creatures that transcended beyond the great world and transcended ancient history might all return. Even thinking and not thinking couldn't stop the footsteps of these creatures. In addition, there were other branches of evolution that were merging, and the nodes were about to return. At this moment there were such creatures moving. For example, the creatures that once belonged to the Yang realm and later fought fiercely with the celestial race, cut off the path to the Yang realm, and walked to the forefront. Now, there was a batch of creatures that were on their way back, and at the same time, outside the Yang realm, an ancient palace floated in the chaotic sea. There were actually creatures awakening in this ancient palace that had been sealed and silent for countless years. In the Yang realm, a certain stone statue was transforming into a body of flesh and blood, and it said, "The Yang realm should be unified." The heavens had changed, and no one could stop the torrent of the great era. Everything was changing. At this moment, Chu Feng had a strange expression on his face. After advancing to the dual permanence king realm, his body was flawless, and he had truly evolved to an incomparably perfect state. There were no problems, and his combat strength was enough to look down on his peers in the heavens. However, when he stared at the seed, he couldn't calm down and felt that it was strange. After Chu Feng finished eating the bright red fruit that was gushing with scarlet light, he left behind a fruit core. It was 2 inches tall, and its entire body was bright red like fire, spreading out waves of real flames. The shape of this fruit core was too special. It was actually the body of a furnace, and it was in the shape of the revered 8 trigrams furnace. A stove was surging with unfathomable flames. This wasn't the strange part. The most miraculous thing was that the furnace lid could be opened and taken off. When it collided with the body of the furnace, the sound of metal and stone was clear. Was this still a fruit core, a seed? Chu Feng really looked as if he had eaten a dead child, and he had a strange and uncomfortable expression on his face. Could he still continue to plant this seed in the future? Why was it divided into 2 parts? The furnace lid was separated from the body of the furnace, and at the same time, it was nurturing a furnace of mysterious flames. This really had become an artifact. No matter who saw it, they wouldn't doubt that this was a very extraordinary weapon. It was extraordinary and mysterious, and they definitely wouldn't think that it was a seed. There had never been a fruit core left behind after it bloomed and bore fruit for the first time. How could this not make him speechless? Can I still plant it or not? Chu Feng was a little suspicious. Could it be that this was actually a supreme weapon that was turned into a seed by a great divine ability user, and it only revealed its true appearance today? However, he quickly shook his head again. Weapons and seeds couldn't be confused. He had looked through all kinds of ancient books in the Yang realm and found some clues. He suspected that there were precedents of living creatures turning into seeds, but there had never been a weapon that could do this. After all, it wasn't a living body. Should I continue planting it? Chu Feng looked at the fiery red furnace. It was truly out of the ordinary. Order rose and fell as it was nurtured in the furnace. One look and he could tell that it was nurturing an unimaginably strange energy. However, when he saw the almighty grade soil, he hesitated for a moment. The quality of this soil wasn't very sufficient, and he was even more worried when he thought about how he almost had a problem when he was cultivating the fruit not long ago. This kind of seed was far more precious and rare than other divine plants. And in order to cultivate the crimson lotus, the Taiwu Academy had cultivated it for no less than 100 years, but they still couldn't fully mature this almighty grade plant. It could be seen that the almighty grade soil in the Taiwu Academy's hands wasn't very abundant. Up until now, Chu Feng already deeply understood what was the most precious in the Yang realm. There was no need to say more about the top-notch pollen, but the quality of the soil was equally important. So much so that some great sects possessed the remnant roots of the legendary Great Universe grade plants, but they just couldn't cultivate it. Why? Everything was because they lacked the corresponding soil. What were the major powers plotting when they divided up their territories? Naturally, it was to find the strongest soil quality. They would filter out strands from famous mountains and great rivers, and after accumulating them over time, they would be able to gather a few portions of the strongest soil quality. There isn't enough almighty grade soil. I have to find some enemies and borrow some to make them pay the price. Chu Feng made a decision. At the same time, it was time for him to save Ziluan. He was very worried for her. You dare to imprison the people around me in a birdcage. Regardless of whether you're luring me into a trap or plotting something else, you'll have to pay the price. Chu Feng said coldly. A creature that could do such a thing was definitely not a good person. His intentions were worthy of death. Sogu. Chapter 1436. The cliff was endless, purple energy pervading the air, auspicious light curling about. There were even more ancient pines that were several thousand years old that took root in the cracks of the cliff, verdant and replete with moisture, the tree trunks bold and powerful like a horned dragon. A white-clothed youth was calm and otherworldly, standing on the cliff, great cultivation fluttering about. He gazed into the distance, as if he was an exiled immortal that was riding the wind. He looked to be in his teens, delicate and pretty beyond compare. This was especially the case with his eyes that were especially bright, his head of hair sparkling, his entire body as if it was shining. This was precisely Chu Feng. He became a dual permanence king, calmly experiencing his body's changes. When he didn't move, he was like an orchid that was born outside of this world, pure and aloof, clear and elegant. However, when he slightly clenched his fist, it was as if a true dragon was reviving. Hong. In that instant, it was as if immortal lightning exploded, accompanied by terrifying white mist, making space distort and collapse. In his surroundings, divine chains of order appeared, densely packed, interweaving like blazing lightning. It was extremely terrifying. At this moment, the mountains were rumbling, resonating with each other. The entire mountain range, the boundless, desolate forest, seemed like it was going to explode as well, the earth quaking and mountains swaying. Chu Feng's blood energy surged, grand and majestic, covering the heavenly sun, covering the entire boundless mountain range, making all types of vicious birds and ferocious beasts tremble. Many of them were at the divine level, but they were all trembling in fear, suppressed until they were lying on the ground, shivering. This was precisely the dual permanence King Dao fruit. Only now did Chu Feng clench his fist slightly. His body didn't move, still standing on the cliff, making the entire great wilderness rumble. Leaves flew about chaotically in the mountain region, continuously falling. Beasts kowtowed in fear, birds crying out when they landed, as if they were bowing down to the Lord of all creatures. Right now, if Chu Feng truly released a fist, it was unknown what would happen. Right now, he had confidence in sweeping through all enemies. Even if he faced the old heavenly deities of various sects, as well as the world's famous figures, he still dared slaughter his way over. So what if he was surrounded and attacked? He didn't fear them at all. As for the so-called same generation, he could stand tall in the sky, overlooking them. Ao Shishing. Chu Feng stretched out his hands and looked at them again and again. Although he didn't punch out his fist mark in the end, he knew how strong he was. He wanted to completely erupt several times, controlling the two King Heng Dao fruits to collide with each other, trying to break through that legendary barrier that was extremely difficult to shake, and thus obtain the Dao fruit of a great being. However, at the last moment, Chu Feng put down his hands and did not do so. Becoming an Empyrean was difficult, and breaking into the Great Being realm was even more difficult. Both of them needed time to grind through. This was something that everyone in the world knew. But Chu Feng felt that if he wanted to enter the Empyrean domain, he could tear it apart now. There was no need for a long period of time to settle, to slowly endure the passage of time. He was confident that it wouldn't be too long before he became an extreme powerhouse amongst Empyreans. Becoming a supreme powerhouse in this domain was only a small goal for him. He didn't want to make use of the great collision between the Tao fruits of the lesser netherworld and the Yang realm to erupt, fuse, and push him into the domain of the Celestial Lord. He wanted to save the opportunity for the most difficult moment in the future. Perhaps when he became an almighty being, or even stronger, when he couldn't climb any higher, he would then use this method to execute it. But now, if he wanted to become an Empyrean, he had another way out, and that was to find a feasible golden light path. Since he had the rare soil for cultivating the crimson lotus in his hands, he could now find other enemies and rob them. He would be able to gather enough of the same amount of mutant soil, and thus plant the mystical seed in his hands. He didn't feel guilty or burdened by finding enemies to collect soil. Instead, he felt a strong sense of joy and gain. This was the feasible golden light path that could allow him to break into the domain of the Empyrean in a short period of time. My enemies, you all owe me a debt. Do you know that? I, Chu Booby, am coming, all of you pay me the rent. Chu Feng said to himself. Whether it was a real enemy or someone destined to be an enemy, or those creatures of the dark world that wanted to hunt him for the bounty, he would attack them all. Whatever demons and ghosts, whatever almighty being, and the strange gray, and the forbidden land of black blood, all of you should die and explode. Chu Feng leaped up and the nearby void collapsed. He came to the sky above the endless forest and looked down at the vast land. If one day I have 2 great universe-level Tao fruits, I wonder how strong I will be. Will I be able to slap the martial madman to death? Chu Feng said to himself. He had always had a wish to beat the martial madman, that ruthless monster, with his own hands. Then, as if reflecting, he said, I have to keep a low profile. I can't be too conceited now. First, I should set a small goal for myself, and that is to beat everyone in the world. Then I'll consider beating everyone in the sky. However, if someone were here, they would definitely be speechless. No matter how they looked at him, he didn't look low-key and introspective. He was a little too full of himself and needed to be beaten to a pulp. How many levels are there in the heavens? How many secrets are there? Above the martial madman, are there still the ancestral madman and the Tao madman? After all, he was also taught by someone. Are there still living fossil-like creatures that don't come into being? Apart from that, he also considered the great Yin realm and other branches of evolution. Recently, he always felt that the world was shaking as if an indescribable supreme terror was about to descend. Apart from that, the gray fog, the indescribable strangeness, the back of reincarnation, the end of the soul river, and so on. Once studied in depth, there were terrifying demonic things that could shake the foundation of time and space throughout the ages. Apart from that, when he thought of the inherent dangers of reaching the great universe level, he also felt a chill run down his back. Whoever wanted to touch this realm would trigger an ominous event and turn into an indescribable monster. This was especially true when he thought about how he himself might reach this realm very soon. Moreover, if he had 2 great universe-level Tao fruits, it was simply unimaginable what would happen. That scene would probably be terrifying to death. I'll definitely endure it. What indescribable? I'll blow them all up. When the time comes, any so-called strange things that dare to cause trouble for me won't be able to do anything to me. On the contrary, I'm the biggest ominous thing for all of you, Chu Feng said to himself. He gave himself confidence and firmed his convictions. He traversed high up in the sky and stepped out of the mountains and rivers in a single step. He gazed at the vast and boundless land of the Yang realm and was momentarily filled with lofty sentiments. From now on, he no longer had any misgivings as he transformed to his heart's content. He was about to sweep through the various overlords and heroes. In the end, he disappeared on a peak that pierced the sky. He used the domain to begin traversing toward his destination. It was a modern metropolis with towering skyscrapers and dazzling neon lights. Flying saucers streaked across the sky from time to time like shooting stars, breaking the tranquility of the night. Many flying machines shuttled back and forth in the sky from time to time, making the metropolis increasingly filled with the colors of science fiction. Chu Feng sighed emotionally. There was a terrifying demonic civilization in the Yang realm and a super-technological civilization. Different provinces had different directions of development. He had just completed his transformation and arrived at such a modern metropolis. It gave him a feeling that time and space were in disorder. Very soon, he disappeared in a flash and entered the city. Not long after, he went online and logged into a special website to contact the Dark Power, the Emperor's support organization. This was an enormous power left behind by old Gu back in the day. Back then, his elder brother was Li Su, unrivaled throughout the Yang realm. Old Gu naturally rose along with him and gained an illustrious reputation. But later on, Li Su died a sudden and dubious death. Those related to him naturally didn't meet a good end as they were targeted by others. Old Gu had left behind a contingency plan. He had developed and supported a dozen or so super organizations before faking his death. After the passage of countless years, it was suspected that only one or two of them were left. The Emperor's support organization was one of them and was exceptionally powerful. Earlier on, Chu Feng and Old Gu had used it once to summon over 100 divine kings to the arena controlled by the six-eared macaque clan. The commotion shook the four directions. But that was also a probe. Old Gu wanted to know whether the command tokens in his possession could still mobilize the Emperor's support organization. The results were fairly satisfactory. But there were still some doubts. Old Gu was very cautious and worried that this organization had long since been controlled by a terrifying ultimate expert. Even if he returned, they might not necessarily pledge allegiance to him. Therefore, after that probe, Old Gu and Chu Feng decisively ran away and didn't contact him again. This time, Chu Feng activated the organization again and asked them to investigate the Phoenix King, an extremely popular public figure. It was this woman who had captured Zi Luan. Chu Feng was indignant. This Phoenix King had dared to target Zi Luan when there was no grudge between them. She had imprisoned Zi Luan, a proud woman who had a close relationship with him, in a birdcage in an attempt to lure him into the trap. It was truly hateful. He thought about it and left some information for the Emperor's support organization to investigate. He quietly waited for the result. Investigate the Phoenix King. This was only one of the many pieces of information. He had mixed up many things to prevent the Emperor's support organization from thinking too much. There's nothing to be afraid of. Use them if you can. If not, then help Old Gu get rid of these traitors. Chu Feng said coldly. He still didn't know whether this organization was reliable or not. But even if they had betrayed him, they would surely do their best to investigate and provide information. That was because it was best to cast a long line to catch a big fish. As expected, it didn't take long. In just a day, Chu Feng had obtained a large amount of information. Speculations about Li Su's life and death, information about the orthodoxies in the Yang realm that had mastered ultimate breathing techniques, as well as the origins of the strongest techniques from ancient to modern times were all included. At the same time, there were also some speculations about the gray mist and the reincarnation path. In addition, the past of some people, such as the martial madman, also provided information, which made the image more three-dimensional. Among the various figures, There were famous celestial venerables of the present age and legendary divine kings of this era. The Phoenix King was also among them. The information was very detailed. If one were to look at it carefully, it would be a vast amount of words. However, Chu Feng had only extracted information about the Phoenix King. The Phoenix King believed that she was a divine king and could be ranked in the top 5 in the Yang realm. But the Emperor's support organization suspected that she was already a celestial venerable. This was somewhat terrifying and not simple. That was because the Phoenix King had only cultivated for a few decades. At most, it wouldn't exceed 100 years. To many evolvers, this was quite shocking. A celestial venerable who was less than 100 years old was simply overflowing with talent and could be called a proud son of heaven of the generation. Of course, people like Chu Feng could only be considered an exception. Moreover, he wasn't a true celestial venerable. This so-called Phoenix King had a great reputation in the Yang realm. She traveled in and out of various provinces and was a very popular celebrity. In fact, she had indeed been a celebrity in the past. She had entered the path through music and was well known in many technology-oriented areas in the Yang realm. She had acted in many dramas with the evolution of gods and demons as the background. She could be considered a natural performance. At the same time, the Emperor's support organization mentioned that behind the Phoenix King was the Soul Light Cave, a terrifying ancient inheritance that almost coexisted with heaven and earth. There was a large amount of information about the Soul Light Cave. Chu Feng frowned after skimming through it briefly. A soul light cave that had appeared in the uncivilized era of the Yang realm was too mysterious. Were they targeting him? In any case, Chu Feng wanted to make an example out of the Phoenix King. At the same time, the Emperor's support organization mentioned that the Phoenix King had recently secretly offered a high bounty to the Emperor's support organization to find Chu Feng and hunt him down with all their might. In addition, the Phoenix King had also sent a direct descendant to the Black Capital to invite a group of dark underground creatures to act together. Regardless of life or death, they wanted to find Chu Feng. Such urgency showed that the Phoenix King was really attentive. It seemed that she wanted to find Chu Feng before the bloodline of the martial madman. Sure enough, you're coming for me. Phoenix King, I'll cut off your chicken head. However, this woman had the Soul Light Cave behind her, which was a little tricky. No one could say for sure how terrifying the Soul Light Cave was. Its power had shaken the world long before Li Su's era. Over the long years, they had been very low-key. Nowadays, many people didn't even know their names. However, the real giants absolutely wouldn't dare to ignore this place. There's nothing to be afraid of. The resources for my path of being an almighty might fall on the path of chaos. Looking for the martial madman and the other dark sources in the great universe alien land? If this kind of words were to be heard by others, they would certainly feel rather speechless. In many people's eyes, it was practically like being struck by lightning. Who would dare to be so unbridled? The next day, Chu Feng arrived at Qingzhou and faced a golden river. There was an immortal residence in that area, and it was precisely the Phoenix King's cave residence. Chu Feng touched the earth with his hand and sensed it secretly. This was a domain technique, and moreover, it was a peerless technique in this domain. He could sense everything in front of him through the earth. There's an almighty. His expression changed. Moreover, it wasn't just one. There should be 3 of them together with the Phoenix King. Was this an inescapable net waiting for him to enter? At the same time, he saw the Phoenix King's new publicity poster when he was looking up information on the internet. It was still her residence with a metal birdcage as the background. It was even clearer than the last time, and it was a very charming woman with boundless charm. It was precisely the Phoenix King, and Ziluan, who was in the cage, had large sparkling eyes. Only Chu Feng knew that it wasn't her eyes that were bright, but rather that Ziluan was holding back her tears. Others might not know, but he understood that this was what the Phoenix King wanted him to see. You're courting death. Chu Feng was secretly furious. He then began to look up various information on the dark web and found a large amount of information about the Dark Capital. On the surface, this was a city set up by the dark underground powers. They accepted all kinds of assassinations, hunting, searching, and other services. As long as one was paid with rare materials, they would accept any job. Through the Emperor's support organization, Chu Feng knew that the Phoenix King's men were there. He contacted more than one dark hunting organization and invited experts from all over the world. At the same time, a powerful expert among the martial madman's disciples was also offering a bounty to avenge Taiwu. Additionally, the martial madman was one of the major sources of darkness in the underground. The people belonging to this faction were being mobilized frantically, and the Dark Capital had a large amount of business in this area. Chu Feng formed a fist seal and gazed coldly at the Phoenix King's residence. It seems I'll have to make some noise to lure you guys out of this place. I'll start by killing your people and the martial madman's men. In fact, what he wanted to do was many times more serious than what he had said. He wanted to go to the Dark Capital and massacre all the dark organizations that accepted his business. He wanted everyone to understand that no matter who it was, they would have to pay the price of blood if they wanted to kill him. Of course, the lineage of the martial madman and the Phoenix King would be the first to bear the brunt of it. Some of them were there. Then, he hoped that the three powerful experts around the Phoenix King would immediately go after him after receiving the news, giving him a chance to kill the Phoenix King. Kill. On the same day, Chu Feng left the Sun River and headed for the Dark State, which was the state where the Dark Capital was located. It was an ancient city with half-collapsed walls that no one had repaired. One of the city gates had also completely decayed. Half of the ancient city had been turned into a wasteland. This was the Dark Capital, the window city that the dark forces opened to the outside world. It was also one of the most active cities for dark hunters. Chu Feng had arrived. He stopped in the distance for a long time and touched the ground with his hand. He sensed carefully and said softly, "It's only a window city of darkness. It's not the center, so it's not as scary as I thought." He discovered that there were only two powerful experts overseeing this place, and they were both in the deepest part of the underground. After studying it carefully, he felt that he had enough time to massacre the city. The Phoenix King's cousin is here, and the extreme martial senior sister is also overseeing this place. There are also other descendants of the martial madman's faction. As for the Dark Lord, Heavenly Lord who wants to kill me, there's no need to talk about it. Today, I'll give you a good beating and slaughter all of them," Chu Feng said coldly. After obtaining the dual Eternal King Dao fruit, he was extremely confident and wanted to slaughter the large number of experts in the Dark Capital who wanted to target him. Chapter 1437. Chu Feng didn't dare to be careless. He observed for a long time and confirmed that there were only two powerhouses in the depth. They were quite far from the surface, so he had plenty of time to act. After some research, he had a plan. This black capital is indeed half ruined and has become a wasteland. The reason it's so famous is because of the gathering of dark forces. This place wasn't the true lair of the underground organizations. It could only be considered the external window of the major dark organizations, responsible for making contact and discussing business. There couldn't possibly be existences overseeing this place because it was too wasteful. Additionally, who would dare cause trouble for these dark organizations? They were always the ones killing and hunting, making all parties apprehensive. But Chu Feng didn't care. They were going to kill him and collect a high bounty to take his head. What else could he not do? He began to make arrangements. Since the half-ruined city lacked domains, he didn't mind helping these dark organizations construct one. Chu Feng quietly made arrangements around the entire city. Fortunately, the scale of the city couldn't be considered too grand. After being reduced to ruins, the area was limited. But he felt a bit of heartache because he had spent quite a lot of divine magnets. Fortunately, he had destroyed the Imperial Martial Organization's lair and obtained a lot of benefits. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to make such a big move in the past. Just because the Martial Madman's faction has a stronghold here and the organization they control has a large number of people here, I don't mind making a big move this time. No one knew that Chu Feng had already begun to make arrangements around the city. He had buried a large number of divine magnets and was constructing a large-scale transportation domain. If it wasn't for capturing people alive and avoiding killing the innocent, I would have already killed you all. Chu Feng's eyes flickered with a cold light. Of course, he was still somewhat apprehensive. He was mainly afraid that the two powerhouses underground would have some tricks up their sleeves and use them to keep him in check. Hence, to be safe, he had to make arrangements carefully. This time, he was going to steal the entire city. Grandpa Chu, I'm going to move the city. The city was indeed quite lively these days. It had accepted a large amount of business, and many major powers from the Yang realm had come knocking on their doors to find a certain person. In fact, the key to all these businesses was Chu Feng. This Chu Feng from the lesser netherworld is really interesting. He's practically the god of fortune. He's here to deliver us money, haha. In the ruins of the city, there were a few intact palaces that were still standing. Loud laughter came from them. As long as they could find Chu Feng and spread the news, they would be able to claim the astronomical bounty. Moreover, they would be able to claim the bounty repeatedly because many major powers had contacted them. Interesting. This Chu Feng is truly the meat of a heavenly immortal. Anyone would want to have a bite. Wu, if we hand him over like this, it would be a bit of a loss for us, someone said. There were broken walls and dilapidated walls on the ruins, but the towering palace that hadn't collapsed was indeed imposing and majestic. It had an ancient aura that made one's heart palpitate and oppressive. This was a group of darkness hunters. There was no lack of Empyreans among them. They were all extremely strong. These dark powers often had dealings with each other. Today, they had gathered together to discuss Chu Feng's matters because they had all received related business. My Western Paradise's bloodline is willing to buy out this business. If everyone captures Chu Feng, you can hand him over to us. The price is guaranteed to satisfy everyone. This was an old woman draped in a black shroud. Her entire body was indistinct and filled with dense yin qi. She couldn't be seen clearly, making people endlessly revere her. The Western Paradise Organization was very ancient and extremely powerful. They were most famous for grasping the 10th ranked of the 10 most powerful wonderful techniques from ancient times until now, Hell's Return. If Chu Feng was here, he would definitely be very shocked. This was because he had come into contact with this organization at the Heavenly Waterfall. They sold Grandma Meng's soup and even controlled the time furnace. That furnace was too evil. Whoever obtained it would be inauspicious, and their final fate would be miserable. Even the Western Paradise Organization couldn't bear it and had to dispose of it. In fact, back then, Li Do had obtained this furnace, and it was believed that his sudden death was also related to this furnace. At that time, Chu Feng had heard, heaven is difficult to bury. Buried in the floating earth of the four extremes, Yin and Yang are the two firewood trees. This also originated from the time furnace, which made his blood run cold. However, very few people in the world knew that the Western Paradise Organization also accepted the dark hunting business. When they walked in the underground world, they didn't publicize their route. Only their peers more or less guessed their origin. Wu, although the Western Paradise Organization is strong, it's still difficult for them to monopolize the ultimate artifact, right? Someone said this with a faint laugh. Obviously, these dark organizations were too well informed. They all knew that the extreme martial sect had once personally visited the small netherworld. What was their goal? It was a supreme treasure. now that Chu Feng from the small netherworld had come to take revenge. It was hard to say whether or not he possessed that unparalleled treasure. However, they also understood that it was possible that the ultimate artifact had fallen into the small netherworld's great abyss, and no one would be able to seize it. However, everyone also believed that Chu Feng had good fortune and had good things on him. At this age, he was able to kill a heavenly venerable, so he absolutely had his own secret. What, the Black Qilin organization thinks that he has an ultimate artifact on him and wants to meddle? Someone from the Western Paradise organization asked. Even if he can kill a heavenly venerable and become King Heng, when faced with an almighty, there's only one word for him: death. For an organization like ours, who can't casually mobilize 2 or 3 almighty. Therefore, he's just a fish belly, and pinching him to death is still very easy. If by any chance he has a supreme treasure on him, who would let it go? He. The people from the Black Qilin organization laughed. They regarded Chu Feng as a fish belly, and they really didn't take him seriously. After all, their organization was stronger than the Western Paradise organization, and the first-generation leader of the organization, the Black Qilin, was still alive. Everyone had the same idea. After finding Chu Feng, they would swallow the supreme treasure, and then throw him to their employers. It could be said to be a one-stop profit. Chu Feng belongs to our faction, and no one can take him away. At this time, someone opened his mouth. It was a female heavenly venerable. Many people slightly narrowed their eyes, and their complexions slightly changed. This was because this was a martial madman's faction's heavenly venerable, and she was responsible for external business. For people like them, everyone knew that the martial madman was one of the sources of the underground darkness. If their faction was determined to get him, others really couldn't fight to the death. Even if Chu Feng really had an ultimate treasure on him, it wouldn't be good to make a move. Of course, not all the dark forces were afraid of the martial madman. Some people sneered and didn't care much. Our organization really wants to cooperate with the martial emperor's faction. Someone indifferently said, "Pinch that Chu Feng to death and avenge Brother Tai Wu, it's our duty." Many people curled their lip. What duty? What revenge? Wasn't it because they were strong enough and had the confidence to compete with the martial madman's faction? The underground dark forces had more than one source. The martial madman was one of them, and the master of the leader who had just spoken was also another source. Nantua, this was a taboo name that hadn't been mentioned for many years. It could even be said that this person had never appeared since the prehistoric era where Li lived gradually became silent. However, everyone knew that this terrifying existence was definitely still alive. Nantua should be a living being at the same level as the martial madman. "There's no need, we are enough to pinch that bug to death ourselves," said the female heavenly venerable from the martial madman's faction. In terms of their relationship, she was of the same generation as the great martial heavenly venerable. The people from Nantua's faction smiled and said, "Haha, there's no hurry. What if you can't find him? We'll be more than happy to lend a hand. This is our duty as fellow dark forces." The female heavenly venerable from the martial madman's faction had a cold expression after hearing this. Not only were they competitors, but they were also enemies. Why would he need their help? It should be known that the great martial heavenly venerable had a great enemy when he was alive, and he fought with him for most of his life. It was from this Nantua organization. If their relationship was harmonious, the disciples of the two groups wouldn't fight and confront each other. "There's no need to argue. Whoever finds him gets to keep it," said another heavenly venerable from the dark realm. He belonged to another super assassin organization. Evidently, this organization was also very strong. The name of the organization was Tai Heng, the same name as the leader. It was rumored that this organization was related to the #1 newspaper in the world of the living, Tai periodical. The Tai Heng organization was rumored to be founded by the second son of the Tai ancestor. Don't argue. Many clients are still in the city and haven't left, said the Heavenly Venerable from the Western Paradise Organization. This time, many people came to issue rewards and discuss cooperation. Many people hadn't left yet. Among them, there were many forces that Chu Feng was familiar with, but there were also sects that he didn't understand at all. All of them had sent their representatives over. The Phoenix King's cousin was just one of them. Even the Human King's family had sent a direct descendant to issue a reward. No matter what, we want to know Chu Feng's whereabouts. And, if we really can't, we can also cut off his head. The Phoenix King's cousin was currently negotiating with some dark organization. Buzz! It was at this time that the whole black capital trembled in an instant. Everyone was shocked and raised their heads. What was happening? Then, everyone discovered that divine light rushed into the sky and mysterious magnetic chi filled the sky, covering the whole universe. This kind of strange phenomenon was too astonishing. In the next moment, space distorted and became completely indistinct. Everyone wanted to soar into the sky, but it was already too late. They were unexpectedly trapped in black capital and couldn't break free. In the depths of the underground, the two powerhouses were roused. Who was attacking black capital? This kind of energy was too intense, ferocious to the point of being a complete mess. It was to the extent that all of the spiritual energy in their seclusion area erupted. Their caves collapsed, spirit grasses withered, and the earth shook violently. It was simply as if doomsday had arrived. The two powerhouses awakened and directly soared into the sky. And then there was no then. The two powerhouses were stupefied. Where did everyone go? At this time, not to mention the enemy, even black capital was gone. It had completely disappeared. The broken walls, rubble, and rotten rafters were all gone. The two were dumbstruck. They were really stupefied and didn't feel good. Where did the ancient black capital that had been passed down through the ages go? Wasn't this a joke? The outer window of the dark world had disappeared without a trace. There wasn't even a strand of hair left. In that place, it was completely clean. Forget about the ruined city, there wasn't even a blade of grass, not even a mouse hole. It was too smooth. It had been completely emptied, and everything was gone. This was even more abnormal than scraping the ground. Even black capital had been stolen. Even though it was hard to believe, the two powerhouses still woke up with a start. Then, they felt incomparably ashamed. Where the hell was this? The black capital whose name had shaken through the ages. In the end, black capital was gone, stolen by someone. There was even less of a need to talk about the troops of the various families. Even though this was the outer window of darkness, and not their lair, there were still quite a few divine kings and some heavenly venerables stationed here. This was a crazy slap to the face. A demonic thief actually King stole away a well-known dark city. This was simply illogical. Was that thief crazy, or was the entire world crazy? Chapter 1438. The two powerhouses stood rooted to the spot like two wooden stakes. They were truly dumbfounded. The city had been lost, and no one knew which bastard had taken black capital away. This was too violent and rude. How could the various dark organizations endure this? Chu Feng naturally didn't have the leisure to pay attention to them. He had long since disappeared with black capital, crossing hundreds of thousands of kilometers and leaving this region. Of course, he was still in the dark province and couldn't cross to other provinces in one go. As for the dozens of provinces away, there was no need to even think about it. This wasn't a matter of teleporting one or two people and laying down a large-scale domain to carry an entire city. This kind of consumption was too great. If he hadn't raided the Supreme Valiant Heavenly Venerable's lair, there was no need to even think about it. Chu Feng simply couldn't afford it. This was the first time he had brought a large number of buildings across the void, and it also displayed his terrifying attainments in the domain of domains. Nothing happened along the way. Black capital landed steadily on a barren land. The Scarlet Land was vast and uninhabited. This was a barren land, no different from Black Capital's original environment. In the Dark Province, the soil quality was the same. Moreover, he hadn't been transported that many kilometers. This also led to the various divine lights disappearing after everything had stabilized. Many creatures in Black Capital didn't react in time and thought that it was just an earthquake. They remained in the same place. In truth, few people would think too much about it. Bringing a city across the universe was simply too ridiculous. "What's going on?" a young divine king asked with a doubtful expression. Black Capital was actually experiencing an earthquake? Many people were bewildered. Could it be that someone was attacking this place? It didn't seem like it. Perhaps it was caused by the cultivation of the underground powerhouses. 90% of the people didn't expect the entire city to be transported away. Who would steal an entire city so crazily? Only a few attentive people gazed at the lifeless land in the distance. They were quite suspicious. Even though it was also a boundless scarlet land, there were still some differences. A few people's hearts were churning. This was simply frightening. The city had been uprooted and left its original location? Who was it? This was too terrifying. Just how powerful was this person to dare target the underground dark powers? He actually possessed such power that even a heavenly venerable couldn't react in time and was imprisoned here. As for the young assassins and the disciples of the hunting organization, 99% of them didn't know what was going on and couldn't react at all. Senior Hu, everything has been discussed. Those conditions are not an issue. Please find Chu Feng as soon as possible, said a silver-robed young man in a palace. This was inside the external business department of the Western Sky Organization. Among the representatives from the outside world and the mysterious figures who were in charge of the negotiations with the Dark Hunters, only a few of them knew the truth. Some of them were quite calm. From their point of view, the Black Capital was the face of the underground world, the window to the outside world. Who would dare to come here and cause trouble? Even if there was an earthquake just now, it was an internal problem. It was most likely caused by the surging of the blood essence of the mighty figure underground. This further proved that Black Capital was terrifying. An old man responded, "We attach great importance to the Soul Light Caves Commission. Oh, the Celestial Master of my Western Sky Organization is currently discussing this matter with the other underground powers in the main palace hall. Wait for the good news." "That's good. Farewell." The silver-robed young man got up with a satisfied smile and was about to leave. "Oh, after the honored guest returns, please tell the Phoenix King to deliver the soul-strengthening grass as soon as possible. We will soon be able to capture Chu Feng," said the quasi-celestial master of the Western Sky Organization. Even if there was an earthquake, business still had to be discussed. They were among the people who didn't realize that there was a change in this place. In another palace hall, many people were also gearing up for a fight. Their fighting spirit surged as they vowed to kill Chu Feng. These were the people of the underground world's martial imperial palace. They were all the younger generation disciples of the martial madman. "We must kill Chu Feng. He's just a ghost from the small underworld, nothing more. He unexpectedly dares to be so insolent. He came to our door to kill the martial uncle. What does he think our martial emperor's line is? He wants to step on us and rise? He's courting death." Some people were unconvinced. A quasi-celestial master berated, "Shut up. Do you want to kill him yourself? You're not qualified. We are only in charge of gathering information. There will be celestial masters who will take action and almighty seniors who will hunt him." If they were dealing with someone else, it would be enough for these disciples to make a trip. However, they had encountered a tyrannical youth, King Heng. He dared to come to their door alone and kill their celestial masters, who dared to look down on him. Although they were angry and on the opposing side, they knew that this youth was extraordinary from the bottom of their hearts. To have this kind of strength at his age was rarely seen since ancient times. And we are only a window to the outside world. We aren't senior members of the hunting team. Our main task is to gather information. We have to distinguish our priorities, said another quasi-celestial master. The people in charge of this place were currently discussing with the people in charge of other organizations in the main hall. There would be a big operation soon. They would join hands to sweep through the world and find that Chu Feng. But it really is a bit sullen. Our martial emperor's line has shaken the world for thousands of years, yet a celestial master was killed by a youth. This is too intolerable. A divine king spoke. Relatively speaking, he wasn't that old. It was the time when his energy was surging and his anger was at its peak. He said hatefully, "The martial emperor's line can't be humiliated. He must be killed." He revealed a ruthless expression. He didn't even think about what the martial emperor Heavenly Lord had done to Chu Feng. He only considered that the martial madman was one of the great sources of darkness, so no one should dare to provoke them. Don't worry, he isn't absolutely invincible at the same level. Our martial emperor hall has always been above the Yang realm. Who dares to look down on us? There are also people who can kill him even at the same age, said a quasi-celestial master. However, he really didn't have much confidence. But now their momentum couldn't be weak. They had to establish confidence for the younger generation. How could they be suppressed by a ghost from the lesser Yin realm? As such, he strongly encouraged everyone. Another elder nodded and said, "And the bloodline of the martial emperor might have already come out. If that person really comes out, he will definitely be the best in the Yang realm. No one in the same generation can be his opponent." Someone outside the hall laughed loudly. "Haha, is there such a person in the martial emperor's bloodline? The martial emperor's heir is about to come into being? Interesting, but I'm afraid you guys won't make it in time. Among the descendants of the first ancestor Nantua, there is someone who has already reached the end of the path of the same realm and has already entered the world. Perhaps that person has already captured Chu Feng and made him a prisoner while you guys are talking." Nantua and the martial madman weren't the same kind of people. They were opposing each other, and naturally, their disciples were also opposing each other with equal harshness. At this moment, the people from this organization were ridiculing them. "Ah, how interesting. Each one is more daring than the other. They're all using me as a stepping stone." Chu Feng naturally came. After entering the Black Capital, his hearing was astonishing. Even though there were domains sealing off the various halls, he could still hear most of the conversations. At this moment, his expression was indifferent as he approached the central area step by step. The intact halls were all there, and they were standing in great numbers. His strength had naturally increased by a level after attaining the dual eternal monarch Dao fruit. With the addition of his domain techniques, no one noticed him approaching the ruins. When Chu Feng entered a hall, the people inside were astonished and suddenly looked at him. "Who are you? Weren't you guys talking about me just now?" Chu Feng was dressed in white and looked quite otherworldly. His eyes were clear and pure. At this time, everyone in the hall saw the newcomer clearly. How could they not recognize him? This person's portrait had already been on their desks for a long time, and he actually dared to take the initiative to visit. Chu Feng had actually come to the Black Capital. The people in the hall were dumbfounded. Was he crazy? He dared to walk into a trap. But after thinking about this person's power, some people's hearts sank. This was the Western Paradise's hall. The Phoenix King's cousin was dumbstruck. They were just entrusting someone, and now the main character had come? This was too much courage, wasn't it? He really didn't know what kind of feeling he had in his heart. There was fear, excitement, and also some apprehension. This person was too crazy. He dared to take the initiative to fight his way to their door? There was an Almighty overseeing this place. The silver-robed God King didn't dare to say much, but he swept his eyes over the people of the Western Paradise Organization, secretly hinting that they should quickly call the Almighty to beat this madman to a pulp. Therefore, he was afraid and also excited. As long as he persisted for a little while, he would alarm the several super-veteran assassins underground. What Heng King! What outstanding young talent disdainfully looking down on his peers. If they didn't let him grow up, they would just beat him to death. In fact, the Western Paradise Organization's Quasi-Empyrean and others were also stupefied. The main character had come. This was too evil. Who gave him the courage? Who gave him the boldness to actually dare to do this? They secretly sent out a signal at the first moment. Their feet stepped on a stone slab with complicated runes. That was a domain gate that could awaken the Almighty from underground. However, there was no movement. The Quasi-Empyrean was about to step on that stone slab, but there was no reaction at all. In a split second, everyone's cold sweat flowed out. The silver-robed man quickly said, "This has nothing to do with me. I am not a person of the Dark Organization. I only came here to discuss a business deal and let them investigate an old case." He was uncertain in his heart. As the Phoenix King's cousin, he had just been plotting to kill Chu Feng. In the end, the killing star had directly appeared. If he knew his identity, the consequences would be extremely terrible. Bang! At this time, the others moved, but they didn't attack Chu Feng. Instead, with the Quasi-Empyrean taking the lead, they all smashed into the wall, wanting to leave this place. After all, there were several Dark Empyrean experts in the main palace. Perhaps they could block Chu Feng. In addition, if they dragged on for some time, the Almighty Underground would inevitably be able to sense it. However, everyone instantly let out a muffled groan. Blood overflowed from their mouths and noses. After they smashed into the wall, they didn't pass through. They were blocked by a layer of lustrous light, as if they had made contact with a pillar that supported the heavens. The bones in their bodies were about to collapse. Heng King's domain covered this place. Who could escape? Chu Feng coldly looked down at them. Not only that, but Heng King's domain also isolated this place, forming a small world of its own. The people outside couldn't sense it. Feng King's cousin? Huh? Chu Feng stared at the silver-robed man. The silver-robed divine king's expression changed drastically. He knew that he was finished. His identity had been seen through. No matter how much he apologized, it would be useless. The other party must have known everything. Chu Feng, I'm from the Soul Light Cave. We can talk about cooperation, the silver-robed man quickly said. His expression was very solemn. Bang! Chu Feng took a step forward. His hair fluttered in the wind, and his aura skyrocketed. Meanwhile, the silver-robed divine king was directly sent flying and smashed into the light screen. He coughed up a mouthful of blood, and his bones made cracking sounds. It was unknown how many of them were broken. How was this possible? He was shocked. Even though he was Heng King, who was also in the domain of a king, his opponent hadn't even made a move. He could crush him with just his aura alone. This was too terrifying. The difference between them was like heaven and earth. Chu Feng, don't kill me. The people of the Soul Light Cave want to talk to you. The silver-robed man spat out a mouthful of blood. Although he was weak and limp, he still spoke with great difficulty. He didn't want to die. Do you want to talk to me, or do you want to capture me alive? Chu Feng sneered. Finally, his expression turned cold as he said, You're not qualified to talk to me about these things. Let your cousin's master come. As he spoke, he naturally released his aura. The silver-robed man was practically on the verge of collapse. Both his soul light and his flesh were cracking, and he could explode at any time. The Soul Light Cave has a long history. Before Li Su's era, it had already intimidated the world of the living. However, if you want to scare me with this name, it's still not enough, Chu Feng said coldly. Considering that the other party was the Feng King's cousin, he didn't shatter him. Leaving him alive might be able to exchange for Ziluan. Your Western Paradise organization wants to hunt me? Chu Feng looked at the others. Wherever his gaze passed, golden runes filled the air. His super fiery eyes had an extremely powerful attack power. On the spot, several divine kings exploded and turned into pure energy. They were directly crushed and disappeared completely. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.